All Might, All Might, All Might took a bite of his small hamburger. The autopsy said that his body had incurred a massive amount of cell damage. If not for carbon dating, they would have thought he was a man over twice his age. Nedzu and Tsukauchi nodded grimly. They'd seen the record themselves, though they hadn't fully appreciated the seriousness of it. Mirio couldn't believe his ears. "That explains why you decided not to pass one for all to me," he breathed. It was one thing to be ready to die for others, but quite another to only have until 40 to live. Melissa looked All Might in the eye. "But Uncle Might, you're—" All Might coughed. "Please don't remind me of how old I am, Melissa. You're, well, over 40. She looked him in the eye. She looked him in the eye. "So why aren't you suffering these effects?" All Might looked down for a moment. "This is just a theory, you understand. But I think that the reason why I haven't suffered this effect is that they had something I don't." Mirio leaned forwards, Melissa doing toe same. "What was different about you, All Might?" Mirio asked. All Might smiled grimly. "Well, they all had quirks of their own to begin with. I didn't." Melissa stared, gobsmacked. Mirio boggled as well. Of all the reason why All Might had lived beyond his predecessor, this was not the one he had predicted. His personal bet was something like his height or a difference in diet. David mirrored his daughter, while Sir had nearly choked on his drink. Even Tsukauchi looked like he'd been hit in the face. Nedzu took a long drink of tea. Ah, humans, so predictable. The mouse bear dog grinned, looking All Might in the eye, while the adults in the room managed to recover from this shocking revelation. Sir managed to hastily put his facade back together, trying to recover his dignity. Melissa was the first to speak, looking at All Might with wide eyes. "Uncle Might, you were quirkless?" With a rather sheepish grin, "It was, well, kind of important that I present as a natural-born quirk user, mostly to try and throw off All for One until I was strong enough to beat him." Melissa nodded, shakily. "If it wasn't you telling me this, I wouldn't have believed it." Nedzu cheerfully picked up a piece of cheese on his plate. "I've already been talking with All Might about the future. He's planning to officially announce his retirement from active hero work when the school year starts. Give people time to acclimate to not having All Might around." He then began gnawing away at the cheese at machine gun speed. All Might simply shrugged. "It'll be hard to adjust, but I'm confident that this is the right decision." Melissa just gave him a sad smile. "I'm going to miss you from active hero work, Uncle Might." David mirrored her expression before a thoughtful look crossed his face. "It would be interesting to find All for One's body, see what we could learn about his quirk from an autopsy." All Might paused slightly before he let out a bitter laugh. Having him be experimented on, that would be a fitting fate. Digging him up shouldn't be too big of an issue. The government probably secured his body. It was right next to mine, after all. He paused to take a sip of water. Sir Night-Eye looked at him oddly. "There wasn't a body next to you." All Might choked on his water, causing both David Shield and Sir Night-Eye to leap up and attempt to clear his airways. Nedzu's gnawing stopped. All Might managed to recover, wiping his mouth with his napkin. When I recovered, I didn't see the body." He looked Nedzu in the eye. "When you were digging for those records, did you see if they recovered it?" Nedzu shook his head, a frown on his face. Mirio had a bad feeling about this, but he wanted to double-check. "All Might, are you saying that you didn't see the body after you collapsed?" "I felt that somebody must have secured the body. I was in no condition to after my fight with him." He looked Sir in the eye. "Mirai, please, tell me we got the body," he begged. Sir Night-Eye shook his head. "When you were in hospital, I searched the battlefield. Nothing. I assumed that he'd been blown to smithereens by your final smash. There was blood everywhere." Nedzu set his cheese down. "Oh dear, I'm afraid to admit that. I've never thought of this as a possibility." Tsukochi was already on the phone, making calls, trying to get a different answer for the question they were all asking themselves. Now, Mirio had been training his prediction abilities for a long time now. His instincts were top-notch, better than most pro-heroes. One look at All Might's face in that moment told him everything. Mirio, Melissa. His emaciated hand gripped the wooden table in a vice-like grip, pupils shrunk into pinpricks. "Could you step outside for a moment, please? Mirio saw the wood of the table start to splinter in his grip. Quickly, Melissa and Mirio left the room. Just as the door closed, he saw All Might stand up, taking a deep breath, the other adults in the room suddenly taking note and backing away themselves. Mirio doubled his speed, Melissa following only a second behind him. Phoo! The house rattled with the force of the exclamation. Once he'd made his feelings appropriately clear, Toshinori flopped back into his chair, staring moodily at his half-eaten slider. The other heroes and Tsukauchi sat in silence, David looking worried for his friend. Melissa and young Mirio came back, expressions shocked. A bitter laugh passed his lips. I really truly wanted to retire, Toshinori sighed, picking up his slider. He bit into it, savoring the illegal burger. Sir Night-Eye shook his head. The body may just have been destroyed. Supervillain 101. Toshinori slapped the table. Never assume the Joker is dead unless you have the body. He'll be out there somewhere. Sir Night-Eye winced but didn't press the point. Next to him, David looked despondent. Maybe that idea I'm working on wasn't so good after all, he muttered. Nedzu shook his head. To think I never thought he could have survived. Bias creeps in no matter what. Sir Night-Eye glared at Toshinori. All Might, please tell me you're still going to retire, he begged. Toshinori had never felt more tired. He may still be out there. I can't retire now. Sir Night-Eye glared at him. What are you talking about? Do you not care for your own? I do, Mirai. Sir Night-Eye stopped as Toshinori continued. I do, but it was my duty to make sure that All for One faced justice for his crimes. If he is truly out there, I'll finish him myself. Melissa looked Toshinori in the eye. So, what are we going to do? Toshinori ran a hand through his hair. Well, I've got to cancel my retirement plans. What Melissa had said went through his mind, crashing his train of thought. Wait, we? Melissa nodded, eyes blazing. Uncle Might, I want to help with this. David shook his head frantically. Melissa, it's too dangerous. I don't care about the danger. Toshinori and David stopped as Melissa practically shouted. She composed herself. Uncle Might, I'm not just going to sit back and ignore you, not if there's a chance I could help. I just want to keep you safe, Toshinori pleaded. I'll help you even if you don't want me to, Uncle Might. Toshinori looked his niece in the eye, saw a fire blazing away as she continued. It doesn't matter if I don't have a quirk. I'll help you in any way that I can. Because you told me, Uncle Might, that heroes always put their noses where they aren't wanted. She blinked back tears, grabbing Toshinori in a hug. So let me be your hero, please. Toshinori's mind raced. Unbidden, he remembered his first meeting with Nana. Do you think I could be a hero? Beside her, Mirio nodded, his smile beaming brighter than ever. That's right, All Might. If All for One comes back, we'll be there to fight him together. Sir Night-Eye's frown seemed to deepen. I don't agree with you going back on your declaration to retire. A slight smile graced his lips as he looked All Might in the eye. But I will help you find him if he is still out there. Same here, Nedzu chirped, a smile back on his face. The greatest villain in Japan's history alive? It's an insult to my intelligence to just let him go. David pushed his glasses up. I'm no good in a fight, but whatever support you need, I'll always give it, Toshi. Tsukauchi clapped Toshinori on the back. I'll help you in any way you see fit, Toshinori. You know that. Toshinori's eyes watered. Everybody. Melissa smiled. You're not alone in this, Uncle Might. Toshinori hadn't felt like this since Nana had told him he could be a hero. Melissa, he breathed. He knew what he was going to say next was irresponsible, but he had a feeling in his gut that this was the right choice. Was this what Nana had felt all those years ago? Melissa, would you accept one for all? Chapter endnotes. Did you think All Might would retire sensibly? No, probably not. At least Melissa will take it. Considering she was keeping up with pro-hero students even as a scientist, I'd say she'd need less training than Izuku. Source, view video. Issue 14, Present and Future Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Midoriya Izuku felt excitement pouring through his body. First of all, it was only about 7 months before the UA exams, and he was confident in his ability to pass it. He had several designs in mind that were sure to wow the judges. The other thing to be excited about was that he had finally managed to replenish the robots. The design for the robots themselves had been perfected over the years. Making them wasn't hard, but it was time-consuming. but they were going to be necessary as a last resort for any villainous schemes in future. Well, I've gotten all of them up to standard, he muttered, rubbing his chin. Their weapons should be fully operational. I'll just have to do another test before the weekend. He had been heading over to the beach to grab some more electronics and steel. He needed a large quantity for his future projects. Looking ahead, he saw a familiar, tall, scraggly figure. A smile broke out on his face. Seeing Yagi-san always made him feel happy. Sure, Yagi hadn't been the most safety-conscious person he'd ever met, but Izuku knew better than anybody else that sometimes you had to throw caution to the wind. Yagi always had the best stories about villains that All Might had fought. If Izuku didn't know better, he would have sworn that Yagi had been there in every fight. Maybe All Might told the stories really well. Izuku would expect nothing less from his idol nemesis. I wonder what Mirio-senpai is doing, he muttered, jogging over to Yagi. A couple of weeks ago, Mirio and Yagi hadn't shown up at their normal time. When Izuku had tried texting Mirio, he'd just gotten a message from the older teenager that he had his internships to worry about, as well as exams, and hadn't been able to come. They had met up a few times, but not as frequently as they had used to when Mirio was cleaning up the beach. He squinted, seeing a shorter and similarly blonde figure to Yagi on the beach. Izuku frowned. For some reason, they looked familiar. He couldn't imagine why, though. Melissa looked at the beach. So Mirio was cleaning this before me? Uncle Might simply nodded. It's good strength training, as well as community service. Not all heroics can be punching deserving villains in the face. Sooner or later, you have to get your hands dirty. Melissa scanned the area, frowning. The beach had the potential to be a beautiful place, but people just kept throwing their trash here. She nodded to a large area of the beach that was free of detritus. Mirio certainly did a good job. Uncle Might, Toshinori, gave a small smile. He did, though he can't take all of the credit. Melissa was about to ask about that when she saw somebody approaching, a teenager her age with dark green curly hair with a wide smile on his face. Ah, hello, Yagi-san. Uncle Might's grin widened. Midoriya, my boy, it's good to see you. Midoriya just grinned back even wider. I was pretty worried about you and Mirio-senpai Yagi-san. I know he's studying, but I really enjoyed talking with him about other heroes. Uncle Might's smile dropped a bit. Don't worry too much about young Mirio, young Midoriya. He'll be coming along later today. Midoriya's face lit up like a Christmas display. Beaming, he turned to Melissa. Oh, and he suddenly flushed. Melissa looked him over. Had he come down with a fever? Hello. How are you? Melissa gave a small smile. That explained it. Some things never changed, no matter what country you were in. It's nice to meet you. He flushed and stammered, trying to get words out and failing. Melissa turned to Uncle Might, who coughed into his fist. Young Midoriya, this is Melissa Shield. Melissa, Midoriya Izuku. Melissa just smiled. It's a pleasure to meet you, Midoriya-san. Midoriya was frozen in place. His eyes were unfocused, staring at some point behind Uncle Might's head. Uncle Might leaned towards him. Young Midoriya, are you all right? Shield. Uncle Might blinked. Not the first reaction I thought you'd have. Midoriya just swayed in place. I can't believe I'm meeting somebody like her. That's all. My hair's a mess, and I'm just wearing my school uniform, and... Melissa's smile widened. Have you heard about me? Heard about you. You're David Shield's daughter. He makes All Might's costumes. Of course I've heard about you. Melissa laughed. Not a lot of people acknowledge that bit. Midoriya looked offended. Well, most people are wrong. Without David Shield's research into quirks, there wouldn't be as many innovations to help people's lives go smoothly with their quirks. He's helped inspire me to go into the support field in the first place. Melissa shook his hand. I'll tell him that. As I said, not many people think about support gear. Midoriya hummed. Without that gear, All Might would have been unable to bring the full force of his quirk to bear. Melissa looked over at the beach. So, I'm guessing that you've been cleaning up this beach as well? She looked Midoriya over. He was more muscular than he seemed at first glance, with worn hands that spoke of a lot of hard work. How long have you been doing that? I haven't really been cleaning it up that much, he managed to squeak out. I mainly use it for raw materials for some gadgets. Melissa's eyes lit up. Wow, what kind of stuff have you made so far? Midoriya seemed to focus more. From his backpack, he pulled out a pair of bracers. Well, this is just a prototype. The materials here aren't the best, but they're good enough for a proof of concept. These are designed for a quick change into most of a bodysuit. Melissa examined it. This is pretty good. You're using a carbon dioxide jet to shoot the fabric out quickly, aren't you? Midoriya's eyes sparkled. Yes, and the main fabric has wiring coupled with a thin mesh to map out the body of the wearer and the fabric. Carbon fiber over silk for proper armor, but I could add in some Kevlar for proper. But you've tested that it works? This would be a major help for some heroes to build a flashy style. Had to go through like 20 different versions before I got it right, but it'll be like a transformation watch. I've been working on something similar, but with special materials. To make something like this with mostly recycled material is... A cough from behind her snapped them out of their shared fugue. Uncle Mike was watching with an expression that seemed caught between worried and admiring. I have to admit, there, Midoriya coughed. Well, this is one of the gadgets I'm thinking of for UA, for the hero on the go. He posed dramatically, holding the bangles out. All you have to do is press the switch, and bam, hero costume on. He turned the bangles over in his hands. Well, I'd probably have to add a belt for the pants. Trying a full bodysuit from the bangles was a bad idea. You would need to wear loose clothing, but it would equip most of the costume, enough to help in a dangerous situation. Uncle Mike glanced over it appraisingly. Well, I won't pretend to understand how it works or all the babble, but the basic idea is impressive, Melissa nodded. Too many heroes don't have access to a basic protection if they're out of costume. Uncle Mike pointedly didn't look her way. But this could be a real change. You're thinking about focusing on a high-mobility hero for this, right? Midoriya frowned at his gadget. That's right. It's a good start, but I need something a bit more impressive for the entrance exam. Melissa could understand the desire to make something more impressive. Well, I'm sure you've heard advice like this before, but sometimes you have to look at the problem from a different angle, and maybe get some better materials. Midoriya sighed. Getting proper materials for my gear is a pain, though, he grumbled. Melissa could relate. Even on Island, you had to sign off on support gear materials with several different places. Too many villains were using the gear illegally, after all. If you need a hand with that kind of stuff, you can talk with Yagi-san or Mirio if you're really worried. Midoriya just shook his head. Don't worry too hard about me. I've found a few places that do decent materials, and this is only one idea. I've got some better ones in the works. He checked his watch. Sorry, I've got a shift coming up soon. He hitched up his backpack, dashing over to the road. I'll maybe see you around, Melissa-san. I'd still like any electronics for prototypes. Have fun in Japan. I will, Melissa waved him off. As he left, she turned to Uncle Mike. He stood there with a gentle smile on his face. So are we going to get started with the American Dream bodybuilding plan? Melissa nodded, checking her gloves. Ready for anything. She wondered briefly what kind of job Midoriya was working at. Probably a coffee shop job, or maybe repair work. Midoriya Izuku got off the train and headed to a back alley near Gentle Criminal's house. Checking in both directions to make sure nobody was around, he removed his shoes, then pulled a tag on his backpack. With a hissing of gas and clunking of machinery, Mastermind's villain costume assembled itself around him. Striding out confidently, he went into Gentle Criminal's house. The villain had, with Mastermind's help, fenced off the abandoned lot behind the house. A few sheets of metal and some of Mastermind's sound-canceling technology later, and the League of Supervillains had a convenient training dojo. Mastermind had been coming here for a reasonable length of time with the other villains, talking about what made a villain a supervillain. Mostly it was about fighting training, throwing a proper punch, how to properly throw, and how to best run away. A couple of times it had been on proper posture and dramatics. Inkblot had called him here for something she thought had been important. Mastermind wasn't sure what for, but her tips had been excellent so far. Inkblot grinned at Mastermind, hands on hips. So, ready for more lessons in villainy? Mastermind nodded, fists clenched. Of course. Inkblot put her hands on her hips. Well, Mastermind, we're going back to the classics. We're talking bombs. Mastermind stared at Inkblot. Bombs? That's pretty, well, dangerous, isn't it? Inkblot just shrugged. I can bench press a fridge, Golden Grin's laser can blow up cars, and Gentle Criminal can beat up teams of heroes. Anything's dangerous. Now I think that this is the ideal form of a bomb right here. She reached behind her back, her quirk manifesting in a splotch of spurting black and white light. She hoisted out her creation, holding it up in front of the class. Mastermind stared at it for a few seconds. It's a few sticks of dynamite rigged to an alarm clock. The items created had the signature appearance of Cartoon's creations, a thick black outline traced over the object, looking like it had been pulled out of a cartoon. Inkblot beamed. Yup. Mastermind tapped his mouthplate with his finger. Well, on the one hand, it will be effective. I mean, it's a bomb. But on the other hand, I could definitely make more potent explosives. It's not just about effectiveness. As Mastermind stared at her, she explained. See, the thing about this that I like is that it ticks. Listen. She held it aloft, the bomb audibly ticking as the second hand went around. Mastermind stared. I mean, it looks and sounds cool. Thank you. But it would be more efficient to have a regular bomb with a digital timer. Inkblot just shrugged. Shows what you know. In my opinion, the important thing about this isn't the bomb, it's the tick. Mastermind stopped as she kept talking, her eyes shining. See, you can hear it tick, getting closer to the big boom. It's the anticipation of it. She frowned. Nowadays, bombs are digital or come from a quirk. No sound, no peril. Mastermind stood there for a few seconds. Peril, he muttered. Inkblot nodded. Exactly. It's the will it go boom or not element that's the whole point of being a villain. Mastermind stood stock still for a moment, then pulled out a notebook. How could I have missed that? He frantically scribbled down notes, schematics. I've got a brilliant idea for the next job, something that will be properly villainous. He laughed, thunder roaring with him. Inkblot smiled slightly shakily. Attaboy, we keep this up, you'll be tying people to train tracks in no time. Melissa panted, pushing the fridge towards the skip. She didn't know what muscles were being worked, just that they were all on fire. In a few more minutes, she would take a break. Uncle Mite stood nearby, face set in a determined expression. It wasn't that she was out of shape. She exercised regularly and had taken some martial arts classes before. But Uncle Mite had designed this program to build her up as much as possible before taking One for All. One for All had so much strength built up that anything less than maximum strength would blow the user's limbs off. Mirio had given her some tips, especially to prevent overtraining. She knew that overtraining wouldn't help, but there was that perpetual need to better herself. She was aiming to become a hero, and technically wouldn't have a quirk until the entrance exam. She was only going to be entering into a hero course exam with other people who might have been working on their quirks their whole lives. But no pressure. At that dinner, they had had a long, frank discussion about the future. Her dad had to return to Island soon due to his secret project, but she could stay as long as she liked, apparently. Uncle Mite had offered her the same training program that Mirio had gone through, though slightly modified to account for the difference in build. Sir Night Eye and Tsukauchi had promised to keep an eye out for any signs of All for One. When she had been offered One for All, she had accepted after a moment's hesitation. Later, when thinking about it, she'd talked with her dad about what to do in the future, because on the one hand, she really, really wanted to be a hero. That part of her from her childhood had never grown up and had her jumping into fights between bullies and others without real conscious thought put into it. But on the other hand, she loved inventing. Building support gear and working with quirk science was just miraculous, and seeing what came from researching quirks and building technology that supported it was just fascinating. For most of her life, Melissa had decided to be the hero that kept the heroes equipped and safe. She had fought and studied and struggled to get to her current level of skill, and had been worried that she might be encouraged to drop it. Her father and Uncle Mite had dismissed that notion. When she'd said it out loud, feeling silly saying it, they had both asked why she would put her passion on hold for heroics. It's a part of who you are. I would never ask you to compromise on yourself to become a hero. Uncle Mite had put it best. Melissa privately didn't think she could be better than her uncle, but didn't let that stop her from hauling the fridge into the skip, leaning against it to catch her breath. Being a hero and saving people, and planning to do so with both her inventions and One for All. What more could she ask for? Mastermind checked over the plans once again. With the materials they had gathered from the building firm, they would have enough to rebuild the robots. He chuckled. Meeting Melissa's shield with Yagi-san had been quite the surprise. To be close with somebody like that, it was like third-hand exposure to the awesome power of All Might. Golden Grin looked at him slightly funny. You okay there, Mastermind? Mastermind coughed. Sorry. I'm just excited for the next job. He looked at the plan on screen. It was going to be large-scale, with plenty of peril, but at the same time, there wouldn't be any actual danger. Underneath his mask, a wide grin spread across his face. We're going to need these supplies. For Mastermind, the future was looking suitably villainous. Chapter endnotes. A bit of a shorter chapter, but a welcome one, I think. So, Melissa starts the training, and Mastermind plans for a future evil plot. What will happen next? Without sufficient comments, we will never find out. Criticize. Next time, another villainous heist and seeing what the side characters are doing. Issue 15. Funny jokes and nefarious plots. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. The heroes assigned to what had become known as the Mastermind Task Force had been out on patrol when they had gotten the call. Mastermind and the League of Supervillains have been seen in the house area robbing a bank. Mount Lady and Kamui Woods shared a glance. With a sigh, Mount Lady called up Death Arms, who was in the office dealing with paperwork and call-ins. Are their heroes getting to the scene? Seems so. Several local heroes are going to the scene along with the police. Which members are out there? Looks like it's just Mastermind, Mr. Warp, Inkblot, and Gentle Criminal. Kamui Woods gave a short nod. We'll have to stay on our route. We'll offer any help we can. As badly as they wanted to be on the scene, they were on patrol to help keep the streets of Musatafu safe. They would have to help in the ensuing investigation, mostly because the League of Supervillains, and specifically Mastermind, were kind of weird. Mount Lady sighed. When did that guy figure out he could rob other places than Musatafu? She smiled widely at a passerby. Any idea what Eraserhead's been doing? Teaching mostly. Seems that his students are having to work their asses off for him. Wait, it seems that a pair of heroes are engaging with them right now. Kamui Woods shook his head. Only a pair right now. Those heroes won't have much chance. Who's confident or dumb enough to try that? Mount Lady pondered. Hold on, I'm just checking. Oh, these two? When Mount Lady and Kamui Woods heard the names, they shared a look. Mount Lady was the first to speak, a confused expression on her face. Her? Really? Mastermind cackled, striding out of the bank with his cape fluttering dramatically behind him. Flanked by Mr. Ball, Compress, and Gentle Criminal with Inkblot bringing up the rear, he felt on top of everything. Robbing the bank had gone extremely well. The villains had arrived, delivering a dramatic entrance, and, most importantly, Mastermind's cloak hadn't gotten caught in the door. Progress. With money in hand, the villains quickly headed for their escape vehicle, the employees helpless to watch them leave with most of the money in the building, now contained in comical bags with yen symbol on them. Mastermind hoisted the spoils in his hand dramatically. Mimoe, ha! Who can stop the League of Supervillains now? Hey, villain with a pie to the face says what? Mastermind turned, reaching into his belt pouch. What? The short supervillain was hit in the face with a custard pie with enough force to send him backwards a few steps. The supervillain seemed unfazed, merely pressing a button on the side of his mask. As a small wiper came up around his eyes, he turned to look at the offender. He actually seemed to be taken aback. Standing there, hands on hips, and with a huge grin on her face, was a green-haired heroine, wearing an orange bandana with a navy shirt paired with orange and green pinstripe puffed shorts. A faint green glow surrounded her, barely visible. Beside her was a well-built man who gave the impression that he was about to offer you a mortgage, wearing a serious brown business suit with an orange pocket square, creases so sharp they could cut somebody. His black hair was slicked back, the oddest thing about his serious appearance being his rectangular eyebrows and fingers. "The smile heroine, Miss Joke," Mastermind shouted. His posture changed to one of utter seriousness in spite of the cream dripping from his mask. From his belt, he produced a small notebook and pen, holding out the pair of items in a serious bow. "Can I have your autograph?" The other villains stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. Miss Joke didn't seem flustered. "Sure thing, villainous scum." As she accepted the items with a huge grin on her face, the warp villain suddenly giggled. Gentle Criminal turned to look at him. "What's the matter, Mr. Warp?" The named villain clutched a hand to his face. I don't know. Just thinking about him getting a pie to the face. Snirk!" He started shaking, trying to hold in his laughter. Mastermind froze. Uh-oh. He looked the hero in the eye as she finished signing. You devilish hero. You've already started using your quirk on us. No fair." Miss Joke just shrugged, a slightly mad grin on her face. "All's fair in heroics and war. Here's your signature." She handed it back to Mastermind, the villain carefully taking it by the edges. He began to back away, only to pause. "Thank you so much, Miss Joke. I didn't expect." Standing there, hands on hips and with a huge grin on her face, was a green-haired heroine, wearing an orange bandana with a navy shirt paired with orange and green pinstripe puffed shorts. A faint green glow surrounded her, barely visible. Beside her was a well-built man who gave the impression that he was about to offer you a mortgage, wearing a serious brown business suit with an orange pocket square, creases so sharp they could cut somebody. His black hair was slicked back, the oddest thing about his serious appearance being his rectangular eyebrows and fingers. "The smile heroine, Miss Joke!" Mastermind shouted. His posture changed to one of utter seriousness in spite of the cream dripping from his mask. From his belt, he produced a small notebook and pen, holding out the pair of items in a serious bow. "Can I have your autograph?" The other villains stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. Miss Joke didn't seem flustered. "Sure thing, villainous scum." As she accepted the items with a huge grin on her face, the warp villain suddenly giggled. Gentle Criminal turned to look at him. "What's the matter, Mr. Warp?" The named villain clutched a hand to his face. I don't know. Just thinking about him getting a pie to the face. Snirk!" He started shaking, trying to hold in his laughter. Mastermind froze. Uh-oh. He looked the hero in the eye as she finished signing. You devilish hero. You've already started using your quirk on us. No fair." Miss Joke just shrugged, a slightly mad grin on her face. "All's fair in heroics and war. Here's your signature." She handed it back to Mastermind, the villain carefully taking it by the edges. He began to back away, only to pause. "Thank you so much, Miss Joke. I didn't expect." Mastermind clapped. "Seeing right angle in action, that's pretty impressive." The hero stood his ground, frowning. "Crooked people like you really annoy me. You could be using that technology of yours for good, yet here you are." Straight edge, quirk, right angle. Any solid surface he touches with his open palm is bent at a perfect 90-degree angle. It can also affect the momentum of objects if he so chooses. It's a powerful quirk for setting up barriers as well as a brutal incapacitation method. Inkblot's eyes narrowed. She pressed a button on her belt, a canister popping out. Quickly, she chugged the lot down before glaring at the heroes. "That's a surprisingly annoying quirk." Reaching behind her, then slightly into herself, she pulled out another mallet, identical to the one that had been rendered useless. "Guess I gotta try harder." La Brava desperately typed away at her keyboard. Several alerts came through, telling her things she already knew. No, no, no," she muttered, staring at her savior as he tried and failed to recover. This job had gone slightly differently. Mastermind had planned his big, evil scheme, but had found that there weren't many places that he could rob that had been involved with shady business. It had been with a heavy heart that they had decided to rob the downtown bank in Hosu. Mastermind had chosen a bank heist because bank heists are suitably villainous, and they'll be insured. And now, it looked like the heroes would capture them all. "Stitch, how are the robots coming?" "Still placing the device properly. More than that, we've got more heroes and police incoming." La Brava bit her lip. She'd have to time it just right to get Gentle Sama her love at the right point to make an opening. And then, He could help her friends out. Mastermind glanced over at Inkblot, then returned his gaze to the heroes. Ms. Joke was standing there with a confident grin on her face in a more traditional fighting stance, while Straight Edge stood with an impassive look on his face. You heroes are the real deal, aren't you? Inkblot looked over at him. What's the plan, boss? Mastermind looked over at the rest of the team, tapping a button on the side of his helmet. Nobody gets left behind, he said, inaudible to the heroes but heard on each member's comlinks. Inkblot, deal with Straight Edge if you can. She gave a slight nod, hand already reaching behind her back slowly. Mastermind continued talking, tapping some panels on his wrist and not taking his eyes off the heroes. Gentle, compress, make for the car and get Golden Grin out of compression. La Brava, Stitch, be ready with my backups. Mastermind, be careful, La Brava warned. We've got other heroes coming in. They'll be here in about 5 minutes. Mastermind sighed a little. It's not unmanageable, but we have to leave now. Everybody ready? As a chorus of acknowledgments went through the comlink, albeit in a slightly wheezy way on the part of Gentle and Mr. Compress, Mastermind greeted the pair of heroes with a raised and outstretched hand. So sorry, heroes, but we have to be off. I'd laugh, but then I wouldn't stop. Miss Joke pouted, arms crossed. I think you should stick around. You haven't even heard all of my hilarious jokes yet. With that, the two groups squared off. Gentle Criminal had managed to mostly recover himself while Mr. Compress was still recovering. Ms. Joke was the first, leaping into close combat with Mastermind. The slightly shorter villain had to back up slightly, blocking a fist to the face with his armored gauntlet, then retaliating with a sparking hand. Gentle and Mr. Compress looked briefly before their priorities caught up. The pair of villains quickly made for the car that they had arrived in. Miss Joke tried to get closer, only for Mastermind to attempt a wild attack. With a grin on her face, Miss Joke blocked few more attacks from the shorter villain, seeming to be slightly overwhelmed, but not losing that smile on her face. Meanwhile, Straight Edge engaged directly with Inkblot, who had finished her preparations. With a wide grin on her face, she pulled out a black sphere with a fizzing fuse and a skull and crossbones on it. Making a bomb like this wasn't her favorite thing to do, but it would work. Straight Edge's eyes narrowed, and he quickly pulled out. Inkblot blinked, staring at the tiny object in his hand. Is that a pen? It looked like a rather fancy pen, with a gold nib and an elegant black body. The pro hero didn't give her a response, instead holding the pen in his palm. Inkblot had seen a lot of weird things with quirks, mostly hers. She hadn't seen a pen go from a vertical position to shooting forwards in a perfectly straight line, cutting the fuse to the bomb and embedding itself in a wall. 90-degree missile, the pro hero proclaimed. From his pockets, he pulled a few more objects that you would see in a typical office worker's pockets, including a stamp and credit card. Surrender in the face of this stationary assault. Inkblot cracked up. Stationary. Ah! The bomb in her hand fell to the ground. Straight Edge just glanced at her impassively as she laughed, trying to recover. I would strongly advise you surrender. That pen alone weighs a full kilo. If you give up, then the justice system will be more lenient. Inkblot's retort to that was a raspberry, hoisting her hammer higher. The pro hero frowned seriously, sighing. Crooked people need to be straightened out. Meanwhile, Mastermind was having serious second thoughts about his ability to handle Ms. Joke. He knew that it looked like he was winning, but he knew the truth. Ms. Joke was controlling the pace of the fight and was maneuvering closer to Mr. Compress and Gentle as they staggered to the car. He could see flashes of Inkblot and Straight Edge fighting, the cartoony woman trying to hit him with her mallet and him trying to take her down. It seemed that Straight Edge was a lot physically stronger than he looked, the serious hero delivering blows that actually staggered Inkblot. If he tried to pull Miss Joke away from them, the move was easily countered in a way that looked ridiculous but insanely difficult. She moved like no other fighter except for Inkblot, all unorthodox angles and silly poses. He had actually tried to take down Miss Joke, but the heroine had proved to be too wily for him. It probably didn't help that Ms. Joke was turning the whole fight into a slapstick routine. He'd nearly slipped on a banana peel that had come out of her utility belt. His own taser glove had been turned on him with a joy buzzer in her hand that still left him smarting, and as for her chosen melee weapon, Mastermind had to block a flailing rubber chicken with his forearm, Miss Joke expertly swinging the ridiculous weapon around to try and brain him. After seeing the pro-heroine break a window with a chicken that had slipped out of her grip, Mastermind was fighting more defensively. Whatever the chickens were filled with, it was heavy and was making his arms ache. It was also a nuisance that seeing the chicken flying through a window had caused Gentle Criminal and Mr. Compress to break out into another fit of near-paralyzing laughter. Outbreak was proving to be a far more troublesome quirk than he could have ever imagined. It was great. It was also not good for their escape attempt. "Do you believe that you can stop a supervillain like me?" he bantered, checking over his gear. If this kept up, he'd have to switch to the other surprise he'd built into his armor. Miss Joke just grinned. "Comes with the job description. Now." She pulled out another rubber chicken, tying them together by the necks. "It's time to get serious." Gentle Criminal was wheezing at this point, the chickens wobbling in her hands. Mastermind nearly collapsed at the image, a hand over his mouth and shoulders shaking. The pro-heroine flicked the chickens around while making a series of Bruce Lee noises, with the noises she made being paired with the chickens making a series of squeaks. It caused Mastermind to actually collapse on the ground, laughing maniacally. Gentle tried to stay upright, but was on his knees, Mr. Compress in a similar state of collapse. "Ma! Oh, God! Ah! Please stop up! I'm actually going to throw up." Miss Joke gave him a short glance, a pair of handcuffs dangling in her hand. Behind her, there was the sound of sirens as the police finally arrived. "It's over." La Brava ran out of an alleyway, desperately. Miss Joke turned immediately, trying to get a laugh with an improvised pratfall, but it was too late. "Gentle, I love you!" Gentle Criminal managed to stand upright, a pink glow surrounding him, his eyes serious. He swung his cane, the green-haired heroine being forced to back away as the weapon cracked the pavement. "I would rather not fight a charming lady such as yourself, but it cannot be helped." His eyes blazed with determination. Miss Joke tilted her head. That's weird. You should be totally incapacitated right now." "Guess my routine wasn't a success, huh?" Gentle laughed. "Don't you know, hero? Love always wins." Mastermind managed to shove himself up, taking heaving, gasping breaths. "Run," he managed to gasp out. Gentle Criminal spared a glance to the staggering villain and Mr. Compress before returning his attention to Miss Joke. In a sudden burst of speed, he was on top of her. Before she could properly react, he swept her legs out from under her, and with another tap, she bounced off the pavement impressively far, the heroine letting out an impressive scream as she flew. Mastermind seemed to recover as she was sent further away, the effects of her quirk diminishing but still desperately trying to get air in his luings. In the car, now, him and Mr. Compress quickly jumped into the Mastermobile, Gentle Criminal staring off at the police. "What about the money?" Mastermind shook his head. We still have some that Mr. Warp got. Leave it." Mr. Compress put the Mastermobile into drive, flooring it, La Brava jumping in the back. With a screech of rubber, the vehicle shot forwards, Gentle Criminal latching onto the back. Mastermind took a few deep breaths, trying to compose himself. In front of them, Straight Edge broke away from Inkblot. He slammed his hands on the ground, the tarmac in front of the Mastermobile suddenly shooting upright in a wall. It was a noble effort to try and stop them, but Gentle Criminal and Inkblot were too tough for that. Gentle's fist combined with Inkblot's mighty mallet blow. The barrier was torn down, Inkblot stretching her arm out to latch onto the side of the car. He saw the green-haired heroine appear, riding a unicycle with a motor, and he immediately tapped the side of his mask, dialing up the volume and gesturing for the Mastermobile to stop. "Wah! It's been fun, Miss Joke, but the League of Supervillains must take its leave." Miss Joke pulled up, a smile still on her face. "Hey, come on. You haven't heard all of my jokes yet." Mastermind chuckled nervously. If you say so. However, I have left a present behind for you. Look." Miss Joke stared at the bank, frowning. A pair of Mastermind's drones fled the scene, leaving behind a large black sphere, an alarm clock rigged up to it. It ticked ominously, the tones sounding out above the police sirens. Miss Joke's eyes narrowed. What exactly are you planning, fiend? Mastermind chuckled. Oh, nothing. Just a preparation that will take advantage of the chemical reaction of a combination of carbonic and acetic acid with an infusion of sodium bicarbonate. In the next 2 minutes, it will go off. The Master Mobile sped up, Mastermind shaking a fist. Make a choice, heroes. The clock is ticking. Mwahaha. Miss Joke grit her teeth as the villains left, before a smile came on her face. When the villain put it like that, there wasn't much she could do. You think a bomb is going to stop you from being taken to justice? Think again. Foul knave. She slapped Straight Edge on the arm. Hit me. Straight Edge nodded. Lining up, he pushed her, suddenly causing her to rocket towards the bomb at a perfect 90-degree angle. Straight boost! As she went flying, he tried to catch up to the vehicle, but unfortunately, even with a quick boost by springing off a small barrier he made, he wasn't able to catch them. Ms. Joke rolled and tumbled next to the bomb, staring up at the wires. With a frown of concentration on her face, she pulled out a pair of clippers. The alarm clock was connected to a part of the device that looked like it would lower a capsule into the main body of the bomb, with a vent at the top for the result to go. The tick of the clock seemed so much louder as she looked over the wires. There wasn't much time before the alarm would go off. Sweat beaded her brow as she selected a likely-looking red wire. Selecting the wire, she managed to snip it. The clock stopped. She waited, gingerly, then sighed. With a frown, she shook her head. This is way beyond the pale. Using a bomb threat like that? She had seriously misjudged them, Mastermind in particular. It seemed like he was the brains behind the group, the one calling the shots. With the whole autograph thing, she'd really thought he wasn't that kind of person. But at least she had been able to stop this before it had gone too far. Straight Edge came up, shaking his head. Crooked people like them have strange ideas. They need to be straightened out. Miss Joke looked over where the villains had made their escape. As much as she wanted to see if she could follow, her vehicles weren't going to catch up. Already the villains had managed to get too far for her to reach them with Outburst. The other heroes were chasing, but it didn't seem like they would catch them, unfortunately. Ms. Joke sighed. Well, at least they dropped most of their loot. She slapped the side of the sphere. And the bomb didn't go off. Something was nagging her in the back of her mind. She wasn't sure what. Straight Edge sighed. A chemical weapon attack seems odd. Sodium bicarbonate and those other things. That's... Ms. Joke shushed him, her eyes wide. That had been what was bugging her. Could you give me a hand? She pried it open. Straight Edge flustered. Miss Joke, wait, those chemicals aren't dangerous. Straight Edge blinked. What? She pulled it fully open, revealing a childish model of a volcano, though on a huge scale, 4 feet high. Looking inside the main item, there was a clear red liquid. The cylinder on top was filled with a white powder. She grinned. Bicarbonate soda, added to vinegar and red food coloring. Straight Edge blinked. A baking soda volcano? These villains are twisted in the head. Miss Joke giggled, then chuckled. It turned into a full-on belly-busting laugh, the heroine rolling on the ground with tears pouring down her face. Ah, he actually said, and I'm a chemistry teacher. I can't believe I forgot that. The police sirens came closer, the police running up, concerned that the heroine had been subjected to some sort of chemical attack. Straight Edge jogged over, a serious expression on his face. There was going to be a lot of paperwork about this, but he always came with stationery. Eraserhead looked over the paperwork with the rest of the Mastermind task force. A baking soda volcano. Mount Lady just shrugged. Apparently so, rigged to an alarm clock, just to fake the heroes out. Eraserhead sighed. Well, at least that heroine was on the scene, and she's far away from us. The other heroes shared a look. Well, Mount Lady spoke first. Eraserhead stared at her. A sinking feeling was building in his gut. What is it, Mount Lady? Kamui Wood spoke up. Considering that the villains dropped most of their haul, she has the best track record of dealing with Mastermind. So, Eraserhead's danger sense went haywire. Please no. The door slammed open, and Miss Joke came bursting through, a huge grin on her face. When I heard about this group, I decided to sign up. She looked at Eraserhead, then did an exaggerated double take. Hey, Shota, marry me. Eraserhead sighed. Not interested. As the Smile heroine let out a laugh at that, he slumped back onto the ground, pulling his sleeping bag over himself. Honestly, you're worse than my students. Ms. Joke let out another laugh. Honestly, Shota, did you forget that time in Paris? Eraserhead's eyes stared straight ahead. There was no time in Paris. You just made that up. She flopped into the chair next to him. There could have been, though. After all, it was a fated pairing at our internships. You and I, we could have been the best team. Straight man and wise guy. Speaking of, Straight Edge is still dealing with some paperwork, but he wasn't interested in this anyways. Said something about dealing with other stuff. Eraserhead didn't comment. The other heroes shuffled awkwardly, unsure if this was something they should intrude on. Eventually, Eraserhead sighed. You did a good job against Mastermind, though. Joke's smile seemed warmer as she looked at him. Aw, Shota, I'm touched. Eraserhead stared up at the ceiling for a short time. Death Arms was the first to respond. Well, we're glad to have another hero on board to try and catch these villains. Ms. Joke shrugged. So are they still C rank? Death Arms scowled. Damn pencil pushers are going for the most technical definitions of threatening. Since they haven't caused any fatalities or major injuries, they're still C rank. The other heroes grumbled. The Hero Public Safety Commission had been more lenient with the rest of them since the Mastermind incidents had continued, but it still rankled that some moron in cosplay had been consistently outrunning them. As the discussion continued, Eraserhead looked over at Ms. Joke. I've got a favor I'd like to ask you, he murmured. Your hand in marriage? Very well, I accept. Not that. Shinso stared at the green-haired professional heroine as she grinned at him. Shinso, eh? She nudged Eraserhead in the ribs. I can't believe you adopted a kid for our family already. Eraserhead just slumped into his sleeping bag. I'm training him for the entrance exam, and I have no intention to start a family with you. Miss Joke looked Shinso in the eye. He looked back hesitantly. Really? You know, kid, if you want to go into heroics, Ketsubutsu High School is an excellent heroics school. Shinso wasn't exactly sure what to say. Miss Joke just laughed. I kid. If Shota's got his eye on you, she stretched out a hand. Put it there. When he gripped her hand, he jerked back when a loud farting noise came out. Good, eh? The old whoopee cushion in the hand trick. It's always funny. Eraserhead just sighed. Shinso stared at his teacher, then back to Miss Joke. Well, it's nice to meet you. She was way too intense for his liking. Miss Joke looked at Eraserhead. So you want me to teach him? Eraserhead shuffled into a more upright position. I would like you to teach him some comic timing. Shinso stared at Eraserhead as Miss Joke's eyes widened. You want me to teach him? Oh, ho, ho! She turned on him, eyes sparkling. Just you wait, kid. I'll teach you the art of punning in no time. After a moment, Shinso shook himself. Comic timing? I don't. Eraserhead looked him in the eye. Comic relief is an important part of some hero's work. It helps put people at ease. Miss Joke nodded, the smile going from her face. My quirk needs me to be funny to use it in a combat situation. I've had to learn the art of timing and how to read the room. Not just that, but you might be able to catch people off guard more consistently if you make it funny. Shinso blinked, then thought about it. He had to admit, against Soga his insults hadn't been able to get a reaction. In other sparring matches, against people who knew what his quirk was, he hadn't been able to work in a good enough insult. More than that, he hadn't wanted to insult his teachers. He looked her in the eyes. I'll be in your hands then. She grinned. Right. She handed him a small book. We'll start with this material, and then we'll work up to funny impressions. Shinso looked at the title of the book, 1001 Dad Jokes, for embarrassing your friends or children. His lips twisted into a grin. Shinso stared at Eraserhead as Miss Joke's eyes widened. You want me to teach him? Oh, ho, ho. She turned on him, eyes sparkling. Just you wait, kid. I'll teach you the art of punning in no time. Shinso shook himself. Comic timing? I don't. Eraserhead looked him in the eye. Comic relief is an important part of some hero's work. It helps put people at ease. Miss Joke nodded, the smile going from her face. My quirk needs me to be funny to use it in a combat situation. I've had to learn the art of timing and how to read the room. Not just that, but you might be able to catch people off guard more consistently if you make it funny. Shinso blinked, then thought about it. He had to admit, against Soga his insults hadn't been able to get a reaction. In other sparring matches, against people who knew what his quirk was, he hadn't been able to work in a good enough insult. More than that, he hadn't wanted to insult his teachers. He looked her in the eyes. "I'll be in your hands then," she grinned. "Right." She handed him a small book. "We'll start with this material, and then we'll work up to funny impressions." Shinso looked at the title of the book, 1001 Dad Jokes for Embarrassing Your Friends or Children. His lips twisted into a grin. Issue 16, Tidbits Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Timeline, 5 months, 3 weeks to entrance exam. Kaneshiro Daiki opened the door of his apartment. His school uniform was rumpled, and his shining gold skin was covered in sweat and grime. "Mom, I'm home." His mother looked over the kitchen counter. She must have just gotten home since she was still in her work clothes. Her eyes lit up as she saw him come in. "Oh, hello, dear. How was school?" Daiki ran a hand through his spiky black hair. School was all right, Mom." He flopped onto the couch. School had sucked like it always did. At least Mastermind had been helping him get his grades up to a decent level. "Big bro." Daiki got a moment's warning before his 8-year-old sister crashed into him. He grunted, eyes bulging as she gripped him. "Hey, big bro, guess what I did at school?" Daiki grinned. "What did you get up to, Akari?" His sister grinned. "I went on the playground with my friends, and I did really well on my English test, and I got a photo of a dog." Daiki's smile took on a mischievous light. "A photo of a dog, huh? Wow, you gotta show me!" Akari laughed, trying to get out of him suddenly lunging at her to tickle her. "No!" His mom sighed wistfully as he wrestled with his sister, pointing a finger at the pot on the stove. A bright beam of light shot from her nail, hitting the stew inside and starting to heat it up. I remember, all of the grown men were dressed like kindergartners. The politician was on a tricycle with a giant lollipop in hand and a propeller beanie on his head. Golden Grin was never more aware of the fact that Mastermind's helmet had a camera and was streaming this to La Brava, going by the confused screaming piercing his ears. For a moment, everybody stared at each other. Aya. Death Arms trailed off. Collectively, the League of Supervillains backed off while the heroes were frozen stiff. The money they'd grabbed was divided between them, and they had video material at least. Daiki had taken the train back home, trying desperately to forget what he'd seen. Now, Daiki just shrugged. "I've met a whole lot of weird customers." He shuddered. He never wanted to see something like that again. "But, I love working with my new boss and the other guys. We're all friends, kind of." His mom just smiled. "Well, it sounds like you're enjoying it better than your last one." Daiki nodded. Those early days of being a villain were still a bit raw. "Come on, the pig's basically quirkless. Just blast his head off already." "Yeah, never going back to those assholes." He smiled at his mom, getting up. He looked over at the photo of his uncle before sitting at the table. His uncle smiled at the camera, a bright blue beam shooting out from his navel. His mother looked over at the photo, her expression tight. "I think he would have been proud of you, Daiki." Daiki felt a knot in his throat. He knew his uncle was still alive. He had to be. His mother smiled kindly. "Could you get the bowls out for me?" "Sure thing, Mom. His uncle was alive. He'd find him, whether by himself or by his private detective." Timeline. 5 months, 2 weeks to exams. Sumi checked her tight white dress for any shed hairs. When you're covered head to toe in black fur, you tended to be particular about any leftover hairs. Idly, she checked the straps one more time, then checked herself out in the bathroom mirror one last time. Inspection finished, she left the bathroom to meet the rest of the League of Supervillains. "Well, I've got a date for tonight. What do you guys think?" She'd been trying to get a date with somebody who was somewhat decent. Most of her dates were either those kinds of weirdos or were assholes. At least a couple of them had actually been in the closet. Mastermind looked up at her from his workbench where he was fiddling with one of the drones. "It's a nice dress, Sumi." Gentle nodded, having changed to his more comfortable clothes. "You look stunning, Sydney. Go knock your paramour dead." Sumi's smile widened, giving a little twirl to show off the dress. "Aw, thanks. And I really hope the guy's decent, not like the last guys I've been dating." Aiba gave her an encouraging smile. You're gonna get this, Sumi. I got a good feeling looking at the guy's profile. Sumi grinned at the shorter woman. Ah, did you hack his Facebook or something? Not everybody's got a friend who's willing to do that. Mastermind gave her a thumbs up. Well, I think it'll go really well, Sumi. You look fantastic. Sumi's grin widened. Trust Mastermind to say something like that. Ha, well, of course it will. Nothing can go wrong. 2 hours later, pretty much everything had gone wrong. Well, not everything. The restaurant itself was nice. At least she could afford to go to better places than when she was just an extra in some small movie studio. Sumi and her date, Hayate Maite, had gotten through most of a bottle of nice wine and a pleasant meal while they'd talked. He was handsome, with a strong jaw and intriguing yellow eyes. Just a shame that he proved to be an asshole. It's pretty interesting what's in that redone Destro book. He glanced around, obviously annoyed. Hello? When are we getting some service? Sumi's eyebrow twitched. Hopefully he wouldn't be too bad. He was one of those guys with a strong quirk who thought that they were owed everything, so kind of business as usual. Well, they're pretty busy here. Wasn't asking you, he sighed, trying to get his smile back. But it's interesting what Destro was trying for. You know what? He was completely right about quirks. Those with strong quirks like you and me, we should really be running this place, getting better service. Sumi's hand twitched. She knew she wasn't going to be happy with the answer, but she felt she had to ask. So what about people without quirks? He smirked. What about them? They've tried to drag us down to their level for so long. So hey! Sumi had gotten up, looking down at him coldly. Thanks for the dinner, but I'm not putting up with your shit. She left the restaurant as he spluttered, idly scrolling through her contacts to get to Aiba. Hey, what's up, Sumi? She sighed. My date's a bust, and I kind of want to get smashed. Are you down? Aiba paused. I'm sorry to hear that. I honestly didn't think. Hey, it's fine. Not the first time. I'm just angry and want to get a drink. Aiba paused. I could meet you at Birukami's? It'll be nice to go out like this, even if it sucks your date didn't work out. Sumi knew that place. It was a bit out of the way, but it was worth it. Great. See you there, Aiba-chan? Later. The bar was dark, classic records decorating the walls. The pair of villains sat at the bar, the dark red leather seats adding to the atmosphere. I guess I don't have any luck with guys, Sumi grumbled into her beer. They're either weirdos, condescending pricks, or gay. Aiba stared off into the distance, her own drink something violently pink in a cocktail glass. I kind of get it. The only guy who wanted to date me in high school only wanted me to be a legal loli. Then I tried to ask out another boy and, well, Sumi gently tinkled their glasses. Well, here's to finding a good man someday. Already found one. They both knocked back their drinks, waving for another round. Aiba patted her on the shoulder. The bartender had raised an eyebrow at her ID, but it was still legal. Cheer up, Sumi. You'll find somebody for you, like I did with Gentle. Sumi put on a slight smile. Yeah, you and Gentle work well together. She lifted her mug to her lips. Besides, we're two gal pals. We should talk about something else other than love. Aiba looked slightly offended. Yeah. She took a sip of her own drink before a wicked look entered her eyes. So, when are you going to ask Mastermind out? Sumi choked on her beer. After some frantic coughing, she managed to recover. What? Why would I? Aiba let out a short laugh. I knew it. You started teasing him, but now it's real, huh? Sumi shook her head. No. Come on, let's talk about something else. Do you really want to fail the Bechdel test? We could be talking about, I don't know, philosophy or something. Aiba poked the taller woman in the ribs. Come on, you like him. Sumi stared at Aiba for a few moments, then sighed. All right, fine. I do like him. Happy? Aiba grinned, leaning on the bar. Yep, so when did it start? Sumi waved for another beer. Probably it started with that whole declaration thing. Then, she remembered talking with Mastermind a couple of months ago, during the gear trials. Proclaimed supervillain had been nice, really nice. Well, that was when I tried to go with K, remember? Aiba wiggled her hand, vaguely. Was he? Sumi sighed. Incredibly in the closet, yeah. But Mastermind. She'd shown off her dress then, mostly to Aiba and a little to the others. Mastermind's compliment was really sweet and somewhat unexpected given how timid he could be when not out in public. Well, Sumi, I think you look wonderful. It really brings out your eyes. You're going to have a great time with anybody. Most guys were interested in her being a furry or looked at her breasts or butt exclusively. Her smile grew fond. And then I remembered those eyes of his, a surprising shade of mossy green. And then, well, she trailed off. And he's always so kind. He treats me like a princess, which I am. She chugged her second glass of beer, letting out a loud burp. Iba stared flatly at her. Sumi huffed. What? I can be princessy, and I can also bench a fridge. I'm not compromising on either. Iba laughed. Sure, whatever. Her expression turned more serious. Have you thought about it? Sumi glanced at her glass. Okay, so you can never tell him this, but a few nights ago, I had a dream. She took a deep breath. With him in it. It had been nice. She'd been in a classic princess dress. He'd been in a classic nobleman's outfit, and a bit taller than he actually was. They danced in a masquerade that mostly comprised of various heroes that she'd fought. The dream had ended just as he took off his mask. Iba's eyebrows raised and she leaned in. Sumi stared at the shorter villain, then knocked back her drink. Ha! Got you! Iba looked at Sumi oddly. I mean, I'm not going to. Too late. It's a Friday night and I'm not talking about this anymore, all right? She stood up, slightly unsteadily. There's a karaoke joint nearby. Let's hit it up. She'd gone there with her former coworkers many times before. They'd had a few drinks, enjoyed themselves, relaxed, sang badly. It had taken the sting off of not getting good parts somewhat, of being stuck with only a minor change in salary for bullshit reasons. Then, well, the studio head had decided to can the project she'd been cast as the lead in, citing that nobody would want to watch a film with a mutant heroine anyway. Prick. She shook her head. Come on, Iba. Trust me, it'll be fun. Iba shook her head. I'm not good at karaoke. Don't worry, I'm bad at karaoke as well. She picked up Iba one-handed, slapping down her card. Let's go. Karaoke was as fun as it always was. Probably more fun, with her and Iba consuming more beer and singing a dreadful version of Lovers again, with no work to get in the way. Timeline. 5 months to entrance exam. Stitch pulled out several antibiotics and a piece of cloth. Bite into this, because this is going to sting. A purple blade flickered into existence on his finger. With an elegant movement, the shirt the patient was wearing fell into pieces. Stitch carefully cleaned the wound, then applied antiseptic, causing the teenager to grip the edge of the bench and let out muffled screams. When he was finished, he carefully wrapped the wound up. There. He pulled out a small tube of antiseptic and a roll of bandages and pressed them into his hand. Come to me or have somebody help you change those bandages for the next couple of days. Make sure you wash your hands before trying anything with the wound. The young man smiled. Thanks. So, what do I owe you? Stitch looked him over. The kid didn't look like a gang member. Probably just some kid who got in over his head. That depends. How much can you afford? The teenager pulled out his wallet, looking through it. I don't have too much money. As I said, what can you afford? He pulled out a handful of yen, only finding 5,000 yen. This is all I have on me. Stitch snatched the bills. That'll be enough then. The teenager stared at him. I can come back tomorrow with more money. You've paid, and that's enough. Stitch stared the teenager down. If you want to pay me more, then get injured again. As far as I'm concerned, this is over. He shooed him out, sighing. Stitch pulled out several antibiotics and a piece of cloth. Bite into this, because this is going to sting. A purple blade flickered into existence on his finger. With an elegant movement, the shirt the patient was wearing fell into pieces. Stitch carefully cleaned the wound, then applied antiseptic, causing the teenager to grip the edge of the bench and let out muffled screams. When he was finished, he carefully wrapped the wound up. There. He pulled out a small tube of antiseptic and a roll of bandages and pressed them into his hand. Come to me or have somebody help you change those bandages for the next couple of days. Make sure you wash your hands before trying anything with the wound. The young man smiled. Thanks. So, what do I owe you? Stitch looked him over. The kid didn't look like a gang member. Probably just some kid who got in over his head. That depends. How much can you afford? The teenager pulled out his wallet, looking through it. I don't have too much money. As I said, what can you afford? He pulled out a handful of yen, only finding 5,000 yen. This is all I have on me. Stitch snatched the bills. That'll be enough then. The teenager stared at him. I can come back tomorrow with more money. You've paid, and that's enough. Stitch stared the teenager down. If you want to pay me more, then get injured again. As far as I'm concerned, this is over. He shooed him out, sighing. The next few clients were villains, a small gang that had gained some notoriety for robbing a jewelry store. The leader, a large man with a bull's head, laughed as Stitch painstakingly cleaned their wounds. Come on, Doc, you should be working for us. As our personal surgeon, we can pay you good money. Sorry, but I treat anybody who comes through my doors. I'm a doctor after all. Stitch muttered, needle and thread flashing as he stitched up the two villains on his table. The bullhead's smile slipped. You sure about this? It'd be a bad idea to make me angry. Stitch's finger lit up with a purple light. The villains tensed as he gestured at the thick lead pipe that one of the members had. As I said, I'm a surgeon. I treat anybody who comes in. I may not have a medical license right now, but that was part of the oath I swore. Quicker than they could react, he slashed the pipe in the thug's hand. After a moment, the top slid down onto the ground, jangling loudly. He looked them in the eye as they flinched back. So do you want me to continue treating you, or do you want to leave? Your choice. Shakily, the villains allowed themselves to be treated. Stitch idly flicked through the channels on the television as he waited for clients. One of his patients had paid him in a bowl of ramen as payment for a tonsillectomy, offering that and lunch for a week. Stitch had accepted this offer in lieu of money, warning the man that he would expect to be paid in full. And Dr. Garaki's revolutionary treatment was used today by Dr. Kirikuchi. Stitch turned the television off. Bastards! He stomped off, glaring at one article on his walls. Brilliant young surgeon, stripped of medical license. Memories came back of that time. An older man in critical condition, and he was operating when another one came in, a younger man, barely younger than he had been at the time. Kirikuchi, I need you to treat the new patient. This man's a higher priority. He'll die anyway. This kid, he's a VIP. We need you on him right now. I trust you to do that procedure. This man will die if he doesn't get treatment. You didn't operate on my son when he was called in? I'll see you never work as a doctor again. Furiously, he picked up a dart and threw it at the article, the dart thudding into the wall. Bastards. More darts flew, punctuated by the single word. When he was finished, he stood there, breathing heavily, before he heard the door open downstairs. Coming down, he saw Mastermind entering with Mr. Compress, the pair battered but not looking seriously hurt. Oh, Mastermind, what happened? Bitterness over his stolen work would have to wait. Mastermind paused as Stitch came closer. Mastermind, Krakathum, is in need of some medical assistance. I got burnt pretty badly. The younger man's posture was sheepish. Some fire-based hero caught him on the side. It's not a bad burn, but it will probably need treatment. Stitch sighed. A doctor's work was never done. Let's see the wound. Timeline, 4 months, 3 weeks. It didn't look like very much. A small house covered in ivy next to a hardware store. If you didn't know about it, or you didn't travel near it and smell the delicate fumes coming from inside, you wouldn't know that it was a tea house. Gentle Criminal breathed in the rich aroma of the pot coming closer. Ah, Golden Tips Imperial Tea. The Kazura Tea House was known for its Golden Tips Imperial Tea, subtle yet refined. Mr. Compress nodded. Nothing like it. The pair of villains sat in the cafe in civilian clothing, the elderly proprietor setting the pot down between them. Without his mask on, Mr. Compress was just another face in the crowd. Gentle Criminal had styled his hair differently and wore a pair of thick black sunglasses with a subdued collared shirt and pants. The rich, golden-brown liquid was poured into the gentleman's cups, Gentle pouring the pot without his typical flair. When Mr. Compress commented on this, Gentle simply smiled. Waste Golden Tips Imperial? No. That would be a far worse crime than what we are planning. Mr. Compress nodded. A fair point. They gently tapped their cups together, inhaling the delicate aroma before sipping. Ah, delightful. Quite. Mr. Compress put his cup down. What an exquisite place. I must admit I had never heard of it before. Gentle chuckled. I found it when I was researching a corrupt business in the area. Though I did not have sufficient funds at the time to visit, I memorized its location. Mr. Compress took another sip. Kazura-san has undeniable talent. He looked around subtly, lowering his voice. It'll be good to relax before we go for the next job. Mastermind seemed enthusiastic about it, at least. Gentle's expression softened slightly. Mastermind, truth be told, I worry about him slightly. He's a kind soul, very kind. Gentle sighed. I won't deny I see myself in him. Before one bad day, I truly wanted to be a hero. Mr. Compress nodded. I can't blame you, though I never had ambitions like that. Gentle looked slightly surprised, then frowned, taking another sip of tea. I've no taste for violence. Most villains are so brutal. But Mastermind, he's a gentle soul, and he's smart enough that he really shouldn't be in this business. Mr. Compress's cup stopped before it came to his mouth. You think so? Gentle's expression turned bitter. I'm not really anything special. I never had the grades to make it anywhere in hero school. Mastermind, though, he doesn't have to be a villain, he chuckled. I mean, he is a friend, and I wish him the best. But I honestly wonder why he's a villain at all. Mr. Compress paused for a moment. Everybody has a reason for doing what they do, and I feel that Mastermind and myself are very similar. When Gentle looked at him, he waved a hand, a bunch of roses appearing. Even without my quirk, I am a master of prestidigitation. I'm a fully accredited magician with and without quirk. If I didn't want to be a villain, I wouldn't be here. He stood up dramatically, cup delicately balanced. The elderly proprietor dully stared at him before shaking his head, leaving the room and closing the door. So why? My reason? I want to expose the corruption in the hero world. He sipped his tea. I wager that his reason is similar. Gentle thought for a moment, then nodded. I guess it's been weighing on my mind. I suppose I have to live up to the Phantom Thief's example and keep on with it, don't I? Mr. Compress chuckled as he sat back down. Yes, I think he would approve of that. Gentle looked at Mr. Compress with an odd expression before shrugging. Still, I hope that the other villains out there stay out of our way. A while ago, the shady room above the abandoned bar was bare of furniture, save for a variety of television screens and consoles. A laptop in the corner was plugged into the wall, displaying various screenshots. The futon on the ground was messy and unmade, and there were dirty clothes and empty cans scattered everywhere. A neat figure with black and purple smoke coming off of his body sighed, starting to tidy the clothes and detritus away before glancing over at the other inhabitant as he tapped away furiously on his handheld console. Shigaraki, I don't suppose you want to read the newspaper or watch the news? There has been an interesting development. Not interested, Kurogiri. Shigaraki didn't even look up from his console. Kurogiri tried again. It might help you plan your next move. Shigaraki looked up, red, bloodshot eyes staring at Kurogiri's. Why should I waste my time with this Hero Society's biased media when I could be spending it doing something productive like gaming? He hunched back over his console. Now I've got to get back to this, breeding a shiny Ralts with perfect IVs so then I can start EV training to beat that fucking bitch Cynthia. Kurogiri stared ahead with the expression of a man who was already dead. In a shaded lair, a small, fat, bald man looked at the television screen, displaying the antics of a certain figure. So, my lord, what do you think? The figure that sat in the chair leaned forward slightly. Scarred, sightless sockets locked onto the figure on screen, loudly proclaiming its status as a supervillain. I think this moron is hilarious, All for One commented, a wide grin on his face. Chapter end notes. So, I decided to expand on the backstories of the League of Supervillains. Since last chapter was so high energy, I thought that we needed a more relaxing bit. The bit with the politicians is referencing a bit from Yakuza, but I was pretty sure that would be in violation of some terms and services. Anyways, character names. Kaneshiro Daiki, Golden Grin, Anime Sumi, Inkblot, Tsuchiya Hydro, Stitch. I had a bit of fun with their names. Next time. A damsel... Issue 17, Damsel in Distress, Part 1, Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Mastermind and Mr. Compress slammed the door shut behind them, then slumped to the ground, panting. Did we lose them? Mastermind checked a screen in the corner of his vision. Looks like it. With a sigh, Mr. Compress pulled out a small collection of marbles. With a dramatic flourish, the rest of the League of Supervillains came out in various states of disarray. Gentle Criminal rearranged his cravat with a fastidious air, La Brava fussing over him. Inkblot took a shaky swig of her ink canister. "We really got a big response, huh?" Golden Grin said. Mastermind had prepared this location and others like it in advance. The League had been increasing the scale of crimes they were committing, and the response against them had grown in kind. So using some of the money that hadn't gone to buying better equipment and making donations to various charities in the League's name, he had purchased a couple of warehouses. The League of Supervillains took advantage of the quiet to take a breather. Gentle pulling out some tea bags and going over to the kettle to make some tea. "Wow, that was pretty intense," Inkblot sighed. Mastermind nodded. "Well, we're going to need to stay low to the ground until everything goes over." They had decided to rob another support company, Moncara. Mr. Compress had infiltrated as a new employee, using talents as a master of disguise to slip in and patch them through while planting cameras. Through tireless investigation, the League had determined that this company was ripping off civilian and hero clients by overcharging, as well as discriminatory hiring practices against heteromorphic quirks. Inkblot had been pissed off about that. "We should totally tie the CEO to some train tracks," she'd growled. Mastermind had shaken his head. "If we do that, then we'll attract really heavy hitters, and I don't think we're ready to fight those kinds of people yet," he'd explained. "Believe me, I want to do something like that since it's classic supervillainy, but when we have a bit more preparation time." Inkblot had frowned, then sighed. I know. Mastermind and Co. had taken advantage of the distraction that had afforded to pull off a big robbery. However, the company had been a bit more prepared than the usual ones that they had been hitting. Not just that, but there had been a visit by a private school tour in the area. Something about demonstrating the benefits of the hero industry to inquiring young minds. That had made the robbery more difficult, owing to the need to avoid too much collateral damage. Whether they had forewarning or just luck, the heroes had been close at hand. The kids had scattered, making things harder, but Mastermind and Mr. Compress had prevailed. With some quick thinking, they had taken advantage of the chaos and managed to escape with loot in hand. With the League of Supervillains safely compressed for ease of transport, Mastermind and Mr. Compress had taken a stealthy route to the nearest warehouse. Mastermind checked over the stored haul. "Everything has gone according to my design." He started to laugh. "The plan to get out worked. Mr. Compress checked over his pockets, then seemed to do a double take. That's odd," he muttered. Mastermind paused his laughter to stare at Mr. Compress. "What's odd?" Mr. Compress rummaged in his pocket. "It seems that I grabbed an extra item on the way out." Mastermind shrugged. "Well, it's probably no big." Mr. Compress pulled the marble out, everybody looking closely and then doing a double take. Deal. Inside was a small figure in school uniform with black hair and glasses, frozen in place. Golden Grin was the first to speak. "You grabbed another person?" Mr. Compress looked away. "Well, in the smoke it's not exactly easy to keep track of everything, and we were in a rush," he mumbled. La Brava chewed her thumb. "This is bad. This is really bad." Inkblot couldn't help but nod. Gentle Criminal looked at the marble, then at Mastermind. "Do you have a plan, Mastermind?" Mastermind had been muttering this whole time, a piece of paper in hand and furiously scribbling on it. When he heard his name, he folded the paper in half. "We'll have to do the damsel in distress then," he stated. Inkblot gave a small grin. "Seriously? We're going to do that? What about the plan that we'd need for that?" Mastermind shrugged. "Well, this happened, and it's not really anybody's fault, so we might as well go for it and make it look intentional." He suddenly posed dramatically. "Besides, you think the brilliant Mastermind, Krakathum, has not just thought of one? Mr. Compress." The taller villain turned to Mastermind neatly. "Yes." Mastermind pulled out a couple of marbles from his own pocket. "We need to make sure that our guest is comfortable and doesn't get any ideas about escaping." Thunder roared. "Wah!" Ida Tenya staggered, vision slowly returning through the thick cloud of smoke. He had just gone on a tour to the Moncara Support Agency, a business that provided quality support gear to a wide variety of heroes. Then the League of Villains had shown up, and he had been trying to guide his classmates to safety when thick purple smoke had enshrouded him and the others. Then, nothing. As he tried to recover, his arm was suddenly pulled behind him, holding him in place with a grip like a vice. As he strained to see through the smoke, it cleared, revealing several figures he'd only seen what must have been a few hours ago. Mastermind, lounging on a throne with Gentle Criminal and Mr. Warp standing on either side. Next to them, Golden Grin and the diminutive La Brava were looking over the space they were in, keeping an eye on him. Behind him, the rabbit-themed villain that vaguely resembled Inkblot kept her grip on his arm firm yet gentle. Mwah! Crackathum, Tenya gasped. The League of Supervillains, Mastermind cackled. Indeed, the rest of the League of Supervillains stood around what was clearly a warehouse, refitted with various pieces of equipment. A large vat behind them let off green fumes, a sickly scent in the air. You're currently in our deepest lair, which is super secret. Tenya's eyes widened. He was in their secret lair? Why would they take him here? Unless a horrible thought snuck in. He broke into a cold sweat. They couldn't know about it, the crime he had committed. Mastermind simply laughed. Oh, the plans we have in store for you. Mwah! Mwah! Thunder roared, the other villains seeming to grin as well. We need your help with a little. Tenya froze in place. He knew it. He'd always known this was going to happen. They had found out his crimes and had him here for only one thing. They wanted a new member of the League of Supervillains and had found him to be a candidate. His mind swam with his horrible crimes. Which one had they found? Mastermind was a genius who had an uncanny knack for finding any corruption, such as that bank which had been revealed to be ripping off other people. Mastermind must have found his shameful deeds and found him prime villain material. What a devious, nefarious villain. Mastermind got out of his throne. Kid, are you okay? He made his way closer to Tenya, hesitantly. What's with that look? We aren't actually going to hurt you. It's just a bluff for the heroes. Inkblot checked Tenya over. I'm not hurting you that badly, am I? You're just a kid, unless you're some sort of businessman or something. She smiled slightly shakily. It's going to be okay. Tenya took in a deep breath. I don't want to be a villain, but if you know what crimes I've done, then so be it. Mastermind stood frozen. Tenya looked at the ground. I need to think of a new villain name. Maybe Reverse Ingenium, that'll work. And I need to work on my villain laugh, don't I? Mastermind, Crackathum, does not know what you're talking about. Tenya whipped his head up, pulling his arm free. You know what horrible crimes I have committed. He gestured animatedly, arms chopping for emphasis. Just last week, I saw that the light was red, but there were no cars, so rather than wait for the walk signal, I crossed the road. Oh, my shameful moral degradation. What? And there's more. Only a few days ago, at the vending machine, I paid for a can of orange juice, and the machine dropped too. Tenya shuddered, in his own personal hell. I wanted to pay for it, but I didn't have enough money in my wallet, so I took the can for myself. He burst into tears, batting away Mastermind's all-might handkerchief. I'm too evil to be a hero. Gentle Criminal looked confused. Well, that's pretty nefarious, but I don't really think that one was a crime. And just a couple of weeks ago, I had to borrow a pen. Tenya's heart spasmed with the shame of not having a pen and showing how unprepared he was for heroics, but he pressed on. And I said I would return it, but I haven't. I stole his pen. He curled up into a ball, rocking backwards and forwards with self-loathing. Mastermind hesitantly patted him on the back. It's, okay. I forget to return pens all the time. Such casual theft. Tenya chopped the air in front of him rapidly, causing the villains to back up. And at Christmas, I said I was going to write a thank you card to all of my family, but I forgot to write a card for my uncle until 2 days later. Truly, I can never be a hero after this. Mastermind looked at La Brava for assistance, only getting a shrug in response. What's your name? He passed Tenya another handkerchief that wasn't soaked through. Aida Tenya. Tenya sniffed, dabbing at his eyes. But from now on, I must be known by my villain name, Reverse Ingenium. It's all I deserve for my crimes. Mastermind paused. Those all sound, villainous, but we just grabbed you so that we could threaten to lower you into a vat of toxic chemicals. Grabbing you wasn't intended, but we're going to make the best of it. Tenya stared at Mastermind in shock. You mean, in spite of my offenses to mankind, you're just going to hold me hostage? You don't think I'm villain material? Mastermind gave him a hesitant thumbs up. Yes? Tenya breathed a sigh of relief. Then his eyes shot open. Wait, toxic chemicals? Mastermind just nodded. Don't worry, the heroes will get you free. It's not exactly what I planned, but Tenya tried to run for it, only for Inkblot to grab him by the back of his shirt and pull him back. Jesus, you're muscular for a teenager, she grunted. Golden Grin crossed his arms and humphed. Tenya's mind spun. On the one hand, he could use his quirk and escape, but on the other hand, he'd be using his quirk without a hero license. That would make him a villain. While he agonized over it, his arms were tied behind him by Inkblot and wasn't able to stop her from ragging him away to the huge vat in the corner. He looked down at the ground in shame. How could he face his brother like this? Ida Tensei nearly dropped his phone. What do you mean? Tenya's gone missing. Horrible thoughts swam through his mind of what could have happened to his adorable little brother. His mother took a deep breath, obviously freaking out herself. The League of Supervillains attacked the company that his class was touring. When they took account of students, I'm sorry, but Tenya-kun wasn't there. Tensei took in a deep breath. It's all right, Mom. I'm going to help handle it. There was a pause on the other side of the line. Then his mother sighed. I know you will, Tensei. Make sure that you capture them all. Tensei gave a tight nod. Of course. When he hung up the phone, he pulled his helmet back on. Team Idolises. Enigma poked her head around the corner, the rest of the agency following suit. Yes? Ingenium looked them over. The League of Supervillains has kidnapped a student after their latest robbery. Team Ingenium will be helping the heroes assigned to Mastermind's specific case make a complete capture. Enigma looked at him oddly. You seem on edge, Tensei. Are you? I'm fine, Enigma. Let's move out. As the rest of Team Idolises started to get moving, he scowled in his helmet. If Tenya wasn't fine when he got there, he was going to make sure that every villain that had hurt him would pay. What were they planning with his little brother? So, what's the plan? Mastermind took a deep breath. Okay, so Ida-san is suspended over the vat of toxic chemicals. Hold on. He turned around, turning up the volume on his mask. Are you all right? The harness shouldn't be cutting off your circulation. I tested it myself. Ida was held on a large platform above a giant vat of glowing and bubbling green liquid. Toxic fumes wafted off of it as the young man squirmed. Release me, you fiends, he cried. Mastermind nodded. He's fine. He looked over the rest of it. So, this'll be a perfect distraction so that we can get away from here and back to our secure hideout. The machine itself won't lower him too quickly. It should be. Inkblot looked at the vat again, turning on the private communications. I still don't know why you had Mr. Compress shrink a vat of toxic acidic chemicals. Mastermind tilted his head. In case I needed a vat of toxic chemicals. Why would you even need something like that? Mastermind looked at her, and it dawned on her that Mastermind legitimately couldn't think of why you wouldn't need a vat of chemicals, just in case. Golden Grin looked at him oddly. A vat you filled with Mountain Dew? Mastermind coughed. As I said, a vat with toxic chemicals and acid. Gentle Criminal opened his mouth to argue, then frowned, thinking it over. I suppose, he murmured. Ida continued to struggle. Your schemes won't work, foul villain. The heroes will be here any moment. Mastermind grinned. I'd like to see them try. Nobody knows you're. He suddenly froze in place. Then he turned around. I knew I was forgetting something, he mumbled. Guess I'll have to leak the warehouse location. Golden Grin boggled at Mastermind. You want to lead the heroes to our location? Mastermind fidgeted. Well, Mr. Compress sighed. Mastermind, while it would be dramatic to have this kind of death trap, our own escape should be paramount. Mastermind nodded. I know. That's why, after we release the clues and we know the heroes are coming in, we'll slip through the back alleys to get away. The other villains shared a look. Mastermind looked down. I know this is risky, but come on. It's a classic death trap scenario. The heroes will save him for sure, and in doing so, we can slip away. It's worked so far, hasn't it? The League of Supervillains thought about it for a moment. Finally, Inkblot spoke. Let's do it. The Mastermind Task Force was already working hard on the scene of the Monkara break-in when Ingenium burst in on the scene, skidding to a stop. Death Arms stared at the younger hero as he panted before he made a polite bow. "Hello, Death Arms-san. I understand you're the one in charge of the current Mastermind investigation." Death Arms recovered quickly, nodding. "Yes, we're just going over everything that Mastermind's left behind, his usual modus operandi." He picked up a tiny screen, scowling. Doubtless it would have some recording of some crime that the company had committed, or Masterminds taunting the heroes with their foolishness. Or both. Ingenium hummed. "Have you had any success at tracking down their bases? Usual routes?" Kamui Woods was the one to answer, shaking his head. "They seem to take different routes every time. We haven't had any luck in tracking them down." Ingenium looked around, distracted. "Well, if you have any reports on their movements after their activities, then Team Idaiton could lend a hand. We're currently involved in an ongoing investigation with the hero killer, but I'm sure we can spare a few." He was cut off by a surprised gasp coming from the rest of the team. Whirling around, he saw a tiny red cube float down, no rotors holding it aloft. As it came closer, a small green lens popped open, lighting up. Projected in a haze of green light was Mastermind, Death Arms exclaimed. The supervillain made a generous gesture. "Indeed, Death Arms. How are you?" "I'm doing great, thanks for asking." "What have you done to Ida Tenya?" Ingenium practically shouted, glaring at the supervillain. Mastermind turned to look at Ingenium, then froze. "Oh my god, it's Ingenium!" He turned to somebody off camera. Is my cape all right?" Ingenium stared at Mastermind, the wind taken from his sails. Mastermind really was just as confusing as the report said. He suddenly remembered that he was on camera and coughed. "Oh, he's fine, and will continue to be for some time. However, if you don't want him to take a bath, you'll have to find us first." Death Arms stared upwards for a moment before clearing his throat. "Enough of your games, villain. Tell us where you are so you can face," he sighed. "So you can face our super cool justice." Ingenium stared at Death Arms. "What?" Death Arms looked shifty. "It helps get him talking. Just roll with it." Sure enough, Mastermind laughed maniacally, thunder roaring through the hologram emitter's speakers. "Very well then, heroes. Better think quick, for the answer will be in these riddles." He cleared his throat, then tapped something on his wrist. The sight of Mastermind faded, replaced by a text box with several separate sections. He read out each one, the heroes watching carefully, Kamui Woods taking a photo of the riddles. "What weighs 6 ounces, lives up in a tree, and is very dangerous?" "Normally I have a small apartment. Once every month I live in a large house, but I did not move out of my apartment. What am I living in?" "I can be found underground and in cards. So what am I?" "I'm bright, but I'm not clever. I burn, but I'm not a bonfire. I sound like I'm a celebrity, but I'm not famous. I twinkle, but I'm not an eye. I can be seen at night, but I'm not the moon. What am I?" Ingenium glared at Mastermind. "Enough games. If you don't hand back Ida Tenya, so help me I'll." Mastermind turned around to somebody off camera. What? Car's ready?" "Oh, hold on. I'm talking to the heroes." He turned back, attempting to get his composure back. "Where was I? Oh yes." Thunder roared yet again, the shorter man laughing as he posed dramatically. "Come on, foolish heroes. If you can't figure out my riddle, then Ida-kun will take a long bath in some toxic chemicals. He tapped a button on his gauntlet, turning around. The heroes watched, searching desperately for any clues. "Okay, guys, I've just told them the location. Now we're gonna have to, Mastermind?" "What is it, La Brava?" The camera's still running. "What?" Mastermind frantically hammered at the control panel. "Oh God, I'm sorry, heroes. This is intentional, totally not an accident. Seriously, it should be." The video ended, the tiny cube hanging in the air for a second. Kamui Woods quickly lashed out to try and grab the cube, but it shot through the air at an incredible speed, rocketing over the horizon. Ingenium stared off in the distance before turning back to Death Arms. He could already feel a headache coming on. Is Mastermind? "Oh, he's always like that." Ingenium jumped about a foot in the air at the sudden cheerful interjection. Whirling behind him, he stared at the people behind him. Miss Joke gave him a cheerful wave, the heroine standing there with a confident grin. Next to her was a familiar face. "Principal Nedzu?" The short rat dog bear smiled. How good to see you again, Ingenium. I only wish it were under less serious circumstances. Ingenium nodded, not trusting himself to speak yet. Nedzu gave him a sympathetic pat on the back of the knee before turning to Death Arms. Now, to finding young Ida. You say that Mastermind left some riddles for us? Death Arms nodded, passing them on with a disgruntled look. Can't believe he's making a game out of it. Putting somebody's life at risk like that. He clenched his fist. Nedzu hummed, checking over the riddles before passing them up to Ms. Joke. What do you think? The pro-heroine looked over the riddles, a small smile on her face. After a couple of minutes, she handed it back. I know the first one, but I still haven't figured out the other ones. Nedzu shrugged. The others would be a bit tricky for most people, I will admit. Ingenium looked at them. So what's the answer? Miss Joke looked him in the eye. Well, the first one's from a classic movie. The answer's a sparrow with a machine gun. Death Arms and the rest of the heroes stared at her. Is this a joke? Ingenium demanded. She shook her head. Nope. Dead serious. Nedzu pointed at the second riddle. That one is a bit trickier, but I believe I've found it. If he hasn't moved out, and it happens once a month, what happens about once a month? Miss Joke pondered for a moment, the other heroes looking between themselves. Suddenly her eyes shot wide open. The full moon, Nedzu grinned. Exactly, which makes where he lives. A warehouse. Miss Joke grinned widely, a laugh passing her lips. I'll have to remember that one. Death Arms and Kamui Woods looked between each other. So what was the third one? Nedzu grinned, but Miss Joke beat him to the punch. Well, I thought about it, and it's a word play. If it's in cards and underground, I thought of similar-sounding words. Then it hit me, she grinned. Taro, it's both a root vegetable. And the name of the fortune-telling deck. Ingenium mulled it over. And the last one? Nedzu grinned. A star, obviously. Think about it. Ingenium stared for a minute. So, sparrow with a machine gun, warehouse, tarot, and star? Those are our clues? Nedzu nodded. Precisely, Ingenium. So, we're going to need a map. From a breast pocket, he pulled out a small map, unfurling it. The heroes crowded around, looking at Nedzu as he did so. So, over here in Musutafu, there is indeed a Sparrow Street. He pointed to a part of the map, letting the heroes confirm. Once they were satisfied, he continued. This part of town does have a lot of warehouses, but I'm confident in this address. He pointed it out. Number 17. Ingenium looked at him. Why 17? Nedzu grinned. The star in the traditional tarot deck has the number 17. Mastermind made that choice deliberately. Ingenium frowned in his mask, but didn't object to Nedzu's choice. Still, we'll have to check all other warehouses in the area just to be sure. He turned around, tapping his earpiece. Attention, Team Iden. We're going to be helping the Mastermind Task Force. I want everybody to get to Sparrow Street. Now, let's coordinate. Mastermind wasn't going to get away with this. Mastermind and the rest of the League of Supervillains checked the radar. We're going to have to time this very carefully, Mastermind murmured. The plan was simple, yet effective. As the heroes would figure out the riddle, the Mastermobile was ready and raring to go. The Mastermind security grid was fully functional and would pick up when the heroes were in the area. When that happened, Mastermind and Co. would toss off a pithy one-liner, then flee the area, and make for the back alleyways where we can split up and get lost. Then we regroup at... We'll make it to Jiran's place, Inkblot finished. You sure we can trust him? Gentle nodded. The man won't sell out some of his best clients. He'll help us lay low if we need to. Labrava checked over her computer screen. It seems that the heroes have figured out what your riddles were about. They're on the move. Ida struggled in his bonds again. Mastermind carefully pressed a button, starting the process to lower him into the vat. Curse you, you foul villains. You won't get away with this. Mastermind gave him a thumbs up. Thank you for being a great hostage. It's really encouraging to hear that. Hope to see you when you become a hero. The computer for the security grid beeped. Mastermind grinned, gesturing. All right, we're getting a hero coming. The door was smashed in, Ingenium skidding in. He took in the scene, then glared at Mastermind. You! Mastermind grinned. Yes, it's me, the devious criminal genius, Mastermind. Thunder boomed, the Mastermobile starting up. Ingenium was about to start towards them, but then Ida's bonds dropped lower. Mastermind waggled a finger. Capture us or save young Ida from a chemical bath? You decide. The car shot off, Mastermind's maniacal laughter echoing around the room. Ingenium didn't hesitate. He sped over to the chemical vat, seeing the obvious control panel. For a brief moment, he scanned the control panel, trying to find how to get Ida down safely. Checking one last time, he pressed the big red button marked Power. It felt too obvious, but considering Mastermind's typical style, it would have to be that one. Tenya stopped, hanging a few feet from the surface of the liquid as Ingenium ran up the steps to the vat's top. Ida, are you all right? Ingenium pulled Ida in closer, freeing him from his bonds. Once free, Tenya wrapped his big brother in a hug. Tensei, He gripped his brother tighter. Thank you for coming to save me. I'm so sorry for causing you to worry about me. Pulling his helmet off, Tensei smiled at his brother. It's all right, Tenya. Besides, I'm your brother. I kind of have to worry about your safety. Tenya pulled back slightly, trying his best to be serious. But Ni-san, Tensei shook it off. The most important thing to do when you're a hero is make sure that everybody's okay after the fact, right? Tenya stared up at his brother with eyes. But what about Mastermind? Tensei patted his head. Did you think I was going to let him get away? He pulled his helmet back on, thinking about the plan. Team Idaitan's philosophy was to make sure that the right hero was in the right place at the right time. Ingenium knew that the right place for him to be was at his brother's side, getting him to safety. The rest of the team he'd called in was focused on catching the League of Supervillains. He'd been counting on them deciding to make a quick getaway rather than fight. Based on their profile, they're a group that prefers not to fight unless necessary. Combined with Mastermind's penchant for drama, and there's no way he wouldn't stay near me long enough to give me a pithy one-liner. That gives the rest of Idaitan time to maneuver, and means that we can stretch our net wide enough to catch them. Over his earpiece, he heard the rest of Idaitan communicating. Mastermind and Co., seen traveling down side roads. Estimated destination is the back alleys of Musutafu. Got that. Make sure that the cordon is properly enforced. In typical Team Idaitan fashion, they accomplished this through strong teamwork with plenty of surveillance. There were a few eyes in the sky, along with heroes on the ground. They were aiming to get the League of Supervillains into a dangerous position, one where they'd have the maximum opportunity. He turned to his little brother. Tenya, are you okay to get home by yourself? Tenya gave a stiff nod. Of course, as befitting a civilian, I'll be heading home after I debrief with the police and heroes. Tensei smiled. So serious, Tenya. You did a good job holding out. Tenya shuddered with happiness, a giddy smile on his face. Of course, brother. I want to be a hero just like you after all. Tensei patted his brother on the back. Be the best hero you can be, Tenya. Now off you go. His headset beeped. Ingenium pulled his helmet back on, ready to hear the news. We've managed to get the League of Supervillains into our ideal position. Enigma and Big Shot are with Kamui Woods and Mount Lady, ready to capture. Mastermind stared out at the scene in front of him. The other villains in the car shifted nervously. The heroes had managed to cut them off, leaving practically no way out. Every way they had turned seemed to have a cordon up. And then they had ended up here, in a small street where the heroes stood. Mastermind recognized the giant hero Enigma, the girl's body, a huge black mass with a bone, white face. Big Shot, the blast hero, stood with his hands together, letting his quirk charge up to its maximum size. Mastermind half turned to the rest of the crew. Guys, I'm so sorry. I let my love of drama get in the way again, and now... Inkblot shook her head. Nah, it was my original idea. Behind the barricade, Kamui Woods pulled out a megaphone, pointing at the League. Villains, come out with your hands up! Mr. Compress straightened his sleeves. If anybody is going to be blamed, it should be me for grabbing him in the first place. Mastermind took a deep, calming breath. It was my plan, as I said, but, well, what's done is done. We can argue about it later. He stood up suddenly. Everybody, get ready to run. Inkblot turned to the shorter villain, eyes wide. Mastermind? Mastermind tapped a panel on his armor, the sound of his plasma reactor firing up. I've been holding a few things in reserve, just in case things got dangerous. Inkblot looked at him in horror. You can't be thinking. Mastermind shook his head. I'm not going to blow them up, but I am going to make an opening for the rest of you to escape." Inkblot cuffed him on the back of the head. She scowled down at him. "Idiot." Her frown split into a shark-like grin. "That kind of plan ain't flying." Mr. Compress twirled his cane. "Indeed, my love of drama matches, and possibly even exceeds your own, Mastermind. To make a final stand against these heroes, possibly escaping," he swept into a bow. "What greater show could there be?" Gentle Criminal wiped some sweat from his brow, adjusting his cravat. "All for one and one for all. This will be our best video yet." La Brava puffed herself up. "We're in this together, and we'll make a spectacular getaway." Mastermind stared at each of them. "No, no. You have to run." Inkblot gripped him tightly. "Nobody gets left behind, remember?" Mastermind stared at each of them. "You guys," he sobbed. Mr. Compress and Gentle Criminal patted him on the back. "Let's give them a show, Mastermind." Mastermind took a deep breath, trying to recover. Yeah. He suddenly perked right up. "The heroes think they've got us, but they've seen nothing yet? Wah!" La Brava smiled, tears glinting in her eyes. There was the Mastermind who had become her best friend. The villains all exited the car, the heroes watching. A burst of warping smoke from Mr. Compress came, golden grin popping out with a similarly determined expression on his face. The whole conversation had been transmitted, since Mastermind had built the communicators to work with Mr. Compress's quirk. Kamui Woods asked the question, "Are you surrendering?" For answer, Mastermind posed dramatically. "Not a chance, heroes. You'll have to do better than this to capture the brilliant Mastermind and the League of Supervillains." Wah! As the thunder roared, La Brava stared up at all of these wonderful people in her life. A grin formed on her face as they prepared to take the fight to the heroes. "I love you guys so much." Chapter end notes. Okay, here is the next thrilling chapter. Originally, it was Todoroki being kidnapped, but this was funnier. So the villains are in a corner. Are we going to see the Tartarus arc? I don't know. I can't even remember what I had for breakfast. What will happen next? On a slightly more serious note, this story has now caught up with the original thread. Now you're going to have to wait for it to update with the original thread. The thread has active discussion as well as additional information that is not directly stated in the story. Issue 18, Damsel in Distress, Part 2 Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Ingenium looked over the attempted capture site for the League. It was, to put it bluntly, a mess. Groaning heroes were picking themselves up while others were helping them. Enigma's large form was laid out flat and cold, her mass expansion quirk slowly reverting her back down to regular human size. Ingenium had ultimately decided to stay with his brother and help with the police, since he knew that was a stressful thing to go through. He had been confident that Team I Dayton working with the local heroes would be enough to contain the villains, ready to cut in if needed. Nedzu checked the scene with a surprised expression on his face. "Curiouser and curiouser," he commented. Ingenium stared at the principal as he spoke. "That's not exactly how I would put it, sir." Nedzu shrugged. "It's certainly a conundrum, isn't it? They've never demonstrated that level of ability before." Ingenium didn't respond to that, instead sighing. He turned to Big Shot, who had pushed himself back up. The larger hero looked his boss in the eye as Ingenium came closer. "Big Shot, what happened out here?" Big Shot sighed, a grim expression on his face. "Well, 1 hour earlier, the villains strode out, intent on making one last scene. Inkblot took point, a grin on her face and her mallet in hand. The heroes came upon them, readying binding moves to try and catch the villains as quickly as possible. "I love you guys so much." Enigma's hand came down on Inkblot to pin the strong villainess before she could cause more damage. Just as the heroes were about to make contact, there was a small light show. They had expected Gentle Criminal to light up. It wasn't widely spread, but many heroes had mentioned him glowing then growing dramatically in strength. La Brava's quirk was powerful when used with others, which meant that trying to catch her was the best option to stop her empowering Gentle. They weren't expecting the other villains to start glowing. The diminutive villain looked as shocked as they were, before she suddenly fell. Enigma's hand came down, Inkblot's eyes widening as she blocked the massive palm. She briefly struggled, then she glowed with a yellow light. "What the?" she breathed. before shoving back Enigma with as much force as she could muster. Normally, that wouldn't have done much more than briefly delay Enigma from pinning the subject. Instead, the oversized heroine was forced backwards a step by that action, managing to catch herself before she landed on any police vehicles. Inkblot checked herself over, her confused expression slowly changing to a grin. Her jacket's sleeves had exploded from how hard she'd pushed, revealing her noodle arms as they seemed to shift between muscular and their normal hose-like state. "I don't know what's happening, but I like it." She pulled her mallet out from behind her back, the heroes holding their ground. Behind her, Gentle Criminal shone with his own pink light, turning back to grab La Brava. "Are you all right, La Brava?" La Brava managed to push herself up, but seemed to be out of energy. "I've never used my quirk like that before," she stammered, shock warring with exhaustion. Gentle Criminal's face turned serious. Quickly, he picked up La Brava, securing her with a cord from his pocket. "Apologies, heroes. We must leave." He bounced off the tarmac, then through the air, rocketing off invisible platforms almost too fast to blink. A hero that got in his way was met with a cane that smashed him down into another hero, sending them sprawling. Mastermind himself was in the front with Inkblot, laughing maniacally. "I guess I didn't need my surprise after all." He slammed his open palm into the side of a car. With a mighty towing, the vehicle was shot forwards like a cannonball, forcing Kamui Woods to turn his binding maneuver into an impromptu net to save some heroes. Mastermind blocked a hero's jab and responded with a blow to the solar plexus that caused the hero to collapse with a hand over his mouth to keep from vomiting. Golden Grin shone even brighter from the glaring yellow light, actually bracing himself to fire. Big Shot managed to unleash his signature blast quirk from his cupped hands, trying to overwhelm the villains. The shot came out as a massive bright blue beam about 2 meters wide. Golden Grin opened his mouth, light building up, and fired, his beam matching its opponent's size. Golden Grin's eyes were wide behind his mask as he unleashed hell. The blast of golden light hit Big Shot's own blue beam, the atmosphere between the two crackling with raw power. The lower half of Golden Grin's mask cracked under the sheer strain, the villain himself only staying in place after having braced himself against a building. Big Shot was sweating himself, the larger hero trying to overpower the beam as the pair raged against each other. Eventually, the blasts faded, Big Shot falling to one knee to try and recover from the strain of using such an incredibly powerful blast. Golden Grin managed to stagger to his feet, breathing heavily and with one hand clutching his stomach. Mr. Warp's smoke billowed out and over the heroes assembled, the villain seeming to disappear from sight before slamming into a hero. He landed a series of blows that left 4 heroes flat on their backs before they even knew what was happening. The villain's coat was shredded from the force of the attacks, his cane bent at an odd angle. Ingenium had been called then, and he'd responded. As one of the fastest heroes nearby, they hoped he would be able to catch the villains. With a quick apology to his brother, he shot into action, speeding down the street using the guidance of Team Adaton. It was still going to take even him a fair bit of time to catch up to where the League of Supervillains was fighting. Enigma tried to block them in, going to her maximum size, but Inkblot got there first. The villainess leapt into the air, shoving her formerly gloved hand into her mouth with a canister of ink. With her cheeks puffed, the villainous gloved hand expanded in size until it was about as large as she was. Enigma was barely able to get her arms up to block the incredible swing, Inkblot following through the crushing blow to knock the heroine down to the ground, other heroes scrambling out of the way. Enigma tried to push herself up, but another hammer-like blow to the face, and she was knocked out cold. As her fist shrank back to its regular size, the smile on Inkblot's face was positively feral, only changing when she saw the rest of the League coming closer. The rest of the League of Supervillains shared a glance, Mastermind especially focusing on Golden Grin and La Brava, then they nodded. With Inkblot and Gentle Criminal leading the main offense, the heroes were simply unable to regain the upper hand. The League of Supervillains smashed a hole through the barricades, the Mastermobile followed behind them. Mastermind helped haul Golden Grin into the Mastermobile, gesturing to the other villains to come with him. As the police tried to get back into gear with the heroes, Mastermind let out one last taunt. Heroes! Today is the day you will always remember as the day you almost caught Mastermind and the League of Supervillains. Thunder roared as the villains shot away, the few heroes not incapacitated, cursing as they tried to track them, while Ingenium and the police tried to catch them, but the villains were ahead of them. Oil slicks, caltrops, and smoke screens were all unleashed from the villain's car, foiling vehicular pursuit. And for as fast as Ingenium could run, eventually the villains made it into the choked alleyways of Musutafu, and he had to give up the pursuit. He could have gone at his maximum speed, but there were far too many tight corners to take while the villains knew the territory. They'd lost visual, and there were no trackers on the Master Mobile or any of the villains. The heroes had to give up, setting up cordons to try and intercept them. But the villains had, once again, vanished without trace. They weren't entirely sure how Mr. Warp's ability fully worked. Nedzu's guess, based on evidence, was that he could warp inanimate objects from as far away as he wanted, but needed longer to try and warp his companions. However it worked, it meant that the League was gone. Ingenium sighed, looking over the rest of Team Idolin. Well, if they were easy to catch, they would have been taken out by now. Nedzu frowned, tapping his chin. We should be grateful that this is a group that is disinterested in killing, and more than that, they operate in a very different way than most villains. Ingenium smiled. At least this way, we know that they can have a massive boost like that. Mount Lady sighed, expression bitter. Well, at least we know that now, she grumbled, glaring at the ground. Ingenium gave her a thumbs up. Nothing's ever going to be completely certain. What matters most is that we know now and that they didn't kill anybody. She chuckled, managing to regain some of her former confidence. Guess we should be thankful for that. Nedzu chattered cheerfully. I'll be going over any footage I can to see if we can anticipate this happening again. But from my instinct for this, I'd say that the villains weren't sure about this maneuver or didn't know it was a possibility. They'd managed to get back to Gentle Criminal's house, Mastermind and Inkblot staring straight ahead. It took them a bit of time to get out of the vehicle. The golden light had long since faded, but the adrenaline was still pouring through their systems. With a deep breath, Mastermind turned to the rest of the League as they staggered out of the Master Mobile. That was incredible. I never thought that was so close. Inkblot gave Mastermind a bone-crushing hug, pressing him into her chest. Holy shit! I know, Mastermind's voice was muffled, trying to pry himself off of her without being rude about it. Gentle Criminal gave them a gentle pat on the back. I understand. First time in lover mode for me was something like that. Golden Grin stared at him. Wait, is that how you felt doing it all the time? I felt like I could do anything. He staggered out of the car, shadowboxing. Gentle Criminal helped La Brava out, the shorter woman still slightly drained. His expression turned serious. La Brava, are you sure you're okay? I'm fine, Gentle. Her cheeks were a brighter shade of red than they normally were. Then she frowned, tapping her chin. But I don't know how that happened. Love doesn't work like that. Golden Grin turned suddenly. Yeah, didn't think it worked like that either. Unless... The rest of the League stared at La Brava with varying degrees of incredulity. She gave Golden Grin a flat stare. You're 16 years old. No way. That, and I really love Gentle. She grabbed him by the arm before releasing it. So I don't understand how. Mastermind managed to pry himself out of Inkblot's grip, staggering slightly as he came over. Well, these things can happen. Sometimes your knowledge on what your quirk can do isn't complete. Sometimes quirks can evolve based on use, or they have capabilities you just never explored. La Brava stared at the ground. Well, love is a strong quirk, and I can't deny that it has grown a bit stronger. Gentle Criminal nodded. I have to agree. It feels like lover mode is staying active for longer, and it feels like I can accomplish more with it. She smiled warmly, then frowned. But this doesn't make sense. I mean, I like you guys, but not romantically or anything. You're my... La Brava stopped talking, her eyes wide. Inkblot came closer. Aiba, You're my friends, Aiba Minami whispered. Then she grinned. You're my friends. That's... Mastermind tapped his chin, already pulling out a small notebook and pencil as he started to think. Were your friends? It could be that love doesn't just refer to romantic or sexual love. It could apply to platonic forms of love as well. Love's power-boosting effects increase depending on the danger that the subject of the affection is in. But that was an incredible amount of power, about as much as Gentle must experience. I'd observed that the strength of the feelings involved mattered. Oh, would different kinds of love produce a different color from love's power boost? Well, some of those would be hard too. Mr. Compress tactfully coughed. Mastermind, you're muttering. Mastermind jumped, nearly dropping his notebook. Ah, right, sorry. Minami smiled. Don't be sorry, Mastermind. We're all friends here. Golden Grin looked between them. So wait, love applies to friendship? Wouldn't you do anything for your friends or family? Golden Grin opened his mouth, then closed it. Fair point. He pulled off the wrecked lower half of his mask, wincing. Still, that was one serious power boost. I still feel sick from that laser blast. Gentle Criminal nodded. Mastermind had to specifically design my costume so that it wouldn't get destroyed by prolonged usage of lover mode. He chuckled. I remember how frequently I had to replace my costume. I have to have a backup jacket and pants on any villain activity I had planned for the camera to make sure that I could keep up the illusion. Mastermind straightened up. Now that I know that love can affect all of us, I think I need to upgrade everybody's gear to handle lover mode. Inkblot nodded. Hell yeah. Though, I don't think lover mode is appropriate, probably not the right term since we're friends. Minami nodded. That's true. She tapped her chin, trying to think about it. Best friends mode? Mr. Compress shrugged. We can always workshop it. You sure you don't want to join us? Death Arms asked. Seems that pretty much every hero that deals with Mastermind joins us. Ingenium shook his head, a warm smile still on his face. Sorry, Death Arms-san. Team Idayton is already involved with the so-called hero killer case. Death Arms scowled at the mention. Stain was kind of a bogeyman, a figure that had already killed a couple of heroes and crippled others. Knowing that Idayton was on the case was reassuring, at least. Would have been nice to have you here, he grumbled. Ingenium gave him a confident smile. Mastermind is certainly a problem, but you know more about handling him now. Plus, if he's involved and Team Idayton is nearby, then we'll help out, and keep me updated on anything interesting. Death Arms smiled. Then he saw Kamui Woods and Mount Lady come back in. How did it go? Are Mastermind and the League considered high-grade villains now? Kamui Woods grabbed a cup of coffee. They're still C-list. What? Ingenium boggled. They escaped from all of those heroes, and the goddamn bureaucrats stated that there wasn't enough damage dealt to justify moving them up a rank. Mount Lady sighed, angrily pouring a cup of coffee. Ingenium couldn't believe his ears. What about their past damages? The death trap. Death Arms stared straight ahead. Chemical testing for that came through. It's Mountain Dew. He didn't mention that Nedzu had laughed himself sick when he'd seen the label toxic acidic chemicals on the side of the vat after the chemical analysis. Ingenium stared at the older hero. Death Arms sighed. Since it wasn't actually toxic chemicals, the HPSC decided that only the results mattered. As for their past damages, the HPSC guidelines do not state that past damages should be added up into current offenses. Mount Lady sang, slamming back her cup. Ingenium managed to find his voice after a few seconds. That's ridiculous. Bureaucracy often is. Nedzu came into the room, a smile on his face. Ingenium shook his head. They're really not going to have them declared more dangerous? Nedzu climbed up onto a chair, tapping at a laptop. On paper, the League of Supervillains are at most a minor nuisance, without fatalities. They were threatening to kill my brother. How is that not? Nedzu held up a paw. I understand your feelings on the matter. Unfortunately, the HPSC guidelines for these matters were put into place to prevent opportunistic heroes from exploiting the system and have not been updated for proper nuance. A similar argument was used for the threatened baking soda volcano to prevent their being justified as more dangerous. He continued typing as the heroes stared at him. Now then, I've gotten into contact with the owner of the warehouse. He says that the buyer was a large fat man who didn't leave a return. However, he did leave an email. Ingenium shook his head. still in disbelief over the inanity of the HPSC. He sold a warehouse to somebody without a return address? It's not exactly illegal. If he was selling explosives, I would be worried. But he really only owns a few warehouses and rented this one to somebody who was paying good money. Ah, and here's the address. Nedzu tapped further, bringing up the relevant information. The other heroes looked at the address with slightly blank expressions. Nedzu grinned. Kubihaka@dmail.com, Ingenium read. Kamui Woods scratched his head. I'm not sure what the name is referencing. Nedzu grinned. Oh, it's not something you'd immediately notice. This name is interpreted by kunyomi. Going to the onyomi form for these characters and you get... The heroes checked the characters, parsing them through their heads. Ingenium was the first to get it. Shubo, he sighed. Mount Lady facepalmed. Mastermind? Are you kidding? Nedzu giggled. I'm looking for other buildings that have this email associated with them, but I doubt I'll find any. Death Arms turned to Nedzu, eyebrow raised. Why? I mean, Mastermind has consistently evaded heroes and the police for over 5 months. Nedzu cut him off. He then sighed. This one seems to have been a deliberate joke. Any other bases may have other jokey names attached to them, but I highly doubt that anything else on this name will be found. In the base, things were relatively quiet. Golden Grin had been checked over by Stitch to make sure that his surprisingly powerful blast hadn't caused him any serious harm. With a clean bill of health, apart from a reminder to eat a more balanced diet, the League of Supervillains sat around, checking the news while waiting for it all to blow over. They won't be able to track the warehouse back to us, right? Mastermind nodded, distracted as he sketched future designs. The first one I purchased with a silly joke name, the other bases used actual, proper aliases. Labrava sighed. You really had to use the joke name, didn't you? Only once. Mastermind pouted. It's a classic bit. Gentle Criminal poured everybody a cup of tea. Well, here's to our success. Everybody accepted a cup, clinking them together before taking a long sip. Once again, plans were made for what to do with the money. Most of the money went to the villains themselves, but a large portion was used for other purposes. Gentle Criminal and Mr. Compress had been extremely supportive when he'd outlined his plan after the first job. Well, I really admired the uncanny thief. In particular, I respected his generosity, giving to the poor when he stole from the rich, Mastermind had explained. Mr. Compress seemed to look off into the distance. He certainly did, he stated, before seeming to shake himself back to reality. So you plan to do the same? Oh, I already did that with my own money, Mastermind idly commented. When the other villains stared at him, he hastened to explain. Well, not the stuff I needed to get better materials, and I bought myself some nice stuff, but I gave the rest of the money away. Gentle Criminal looked at Mastermind with an appreciative eye. You've been doing this from the start? Mastermind nodded, the older villain sitting back. Inkblot nearly dropped her drink. Wait. I mean, sure, that's noble and all. But I mean, how much? Mastermind rubbed the back of his head. Well, it wasn't that much, really, and he looked at her expression, decided to hedge. I think about half? The rest of the villains stared at him as he seemed to wilt. I mean, I didn't need it after I got the materials, and, well, we wouldn't be giving away as much as half. Much as I'd like to, we would need more money since you guys might need it as well, and... Inkblot looked at him with wide eyes. Half your haul? Mastermind nodded slowly. Yes? Inkblot looked stunned. Jesus, you're way too nice for your own good. Golden Grin stared at him. Really? Half your haul? I think I answered that question already. Mr. Compress held up a hand. As he said, he probably wasn't going to be donating those figures if we're all working together. As a crew, we can hit larger targets, and we can make a donation of about 1/3 or 1/4 and still have enough money to get by comfortably. Mastermind nodded. Oji Harima donated to those who had been affected by corrupt heroes or businesses. While I don't think heroes today are as bad as they once were, I still want to help people who needed a hand. The rest of the villains gave the matter some thought, a couple of them considering. Mastermind decided to go for the pragmatic option. Plus, it would give us some much-needed good publicity. People might be more sympathetic and less likely to go after us. That seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back. The League decided that a generous donation from the League of Supervillains and Mastermind would circulate to charities that actually helped people out. There were certain causes that grabbed their attention, mostly for how close and personal they were for each of them. Quirkless help, heteromorphic support in the more rural areas of Japan, helping small families. Nobody asked too many questions about why each member chose a business or charity to donate to. After their plans and a lovely cup of tea, the League of Supervillains went their separate ways. Inkblot dragged La Brava off, citing a girls' night. Gentle Criminal stayed at home, Mr. Compress dramatically leaving with a smoke bomb. Stitch headed to the bar in a similar direction as the other supervillains. Golden Grin waved Mastermind goodbye, heading to his train. Mastermind's own departure was quieter, his plain looks attracting no attention. In his basement lair, Midoriya Izuku cheerfully tinkered away, checking the wiring and circuits on his armor. Lover's mode activating on me using platonic feelings of friendship was interesting, he muttered, idly pulling out his sketchbook and sketching an improved armor design. Really, he'd been fortunate that he'd made all of those upgrades. Ever since he'd fought Eraserhead in that back alley, he'd been aware of how much he needed to upgrade his armor. At least, he hadn't needed to deploy its more impressive features yet. But the possibilities. He would need to seriously overhaul the costumes, and that would take some more serious chemicals and fabrics. Future upgrades to his armor were going to be interesting. He'd need to see if his surprise would work with friend mode. I wonder if Jiran can source some titanium gold alloy, he mumbled, checking his available fabrics. And maybe some more of those really high-end fabrics as well. We need more hero-grade material. A beeping from the wristband of his armor snapped him out of his thoughts. Checking it, he grinned. Unusual energy signature analyzed. Frequency information downloading. Izuku grinned widely. Now this was going to be interesting. Chapter endnotes. So here we have it. The thrilling conclusion. I have to say, I've been building up to that one for quite some time. My main rationale for La Brava never noticing this part of her quirk is that in canon she didn't exactly have a lot of friends, much less friends she would be willing to die for. The Tartarus arc will have to wait. Honestly, this bit has a lot of ideas that I wanted to have but didn't feel right to put in. They'll have to wait for a future chapter, maybe a side story. As an edit, I changed the wordplay in the email to something advised in the thread. Next time, a look at the lives of people not on the League of Villains. Issue 19, Friends in Heroic Places, Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Toshinori checked over the beach before turning to give his goddaughter a reassuring smile. You have done an exceptional job today, Melissa. Melissa panted, managing to scrape herself up off the beach. The determined expression on her face hadn't left. I think Mirio did most of the work already. Toshinori shrugged. True, though some garbage came back. Melissa checked her work, already thinking of the next step. I think the beach looks better today, don't you? Toshinori just nodded. Only a few months ago, the beach had seemed to be covered in trash. Now, there was an ever-growing clear part, its size expanding with every day that Melissa was here. If you keep this up, you'll have completed the goal before the UA entrance exam. He hesitated. Ah, speaking of which, are you sure you don't want to be on the recommended list? Really, it wouldn't have been hard. Nedzu knew that One For All's next bearer was being trained so that she could handle the quirk. With All Might's own recommendation, she would easily be able to make it in. But Melissa had turned down the recommendation, stating a desire to get in with her own merit. Melissa gave a determined nod. I mean, Uncle Might, you've already done so much for me. Her expression turned wistful. Everybody's done so much to help me. And Toshinori gently patted her on the shoulder. As I said before, Melissa, power you earned is different from power you gained by chance. He gave her a reassuring smile. You've worked hard for this. You're not indebted to me or anybody else. His phone buzzed. Ah, one moment. He turned the screen on, checking the information. He frowned at it. Melissa glanced at her adoptive uncle with a concerned expression. What's wrong, Uncle Might? Toshinori sighed. It's another donation in the name of the League of Supervillains. He wondered if it was some sort of joke. Ever since the first appearance of Mastermind, there had been donations, not just to him, but to various other groups and people in need, all made out from Mastermind or the League. His quirkless charity in particular had seen some large donations. Melissa gave him a pensive look. It's not typical villain behavior. Toshinori shrugged. They really take the Phantom Thief routine seriously. In spite of his better instincts, a smile crossed his face. He had studied the past villains of history, mostly for any hints regarding All for One. They had ranged from revolutionary figures like Destro to people who had lashed out at a world that hadn't understood them and made no effort to, monsters and almost noble figures. Oji Harima had been an interesting person. Certainly what he had done had caused major damage, but the man's donations had been on the level. Combined with his choice of targets, and it left Toshinori wondering whether he could have been a hero if born in a different time. Are you going to keep the donation? Toshinori thought about it before nodding. It's an important cause they're donating to. If it really is the League, then at least the money is going back to something important. And if it isn't, then it's a joke in slightly poor taste, but will still help people. That's what ultimately matters. The money involved in the donations was always clean, with no criminal traces, and Toshinori wasn't going to deny people the right to donate in his name. Mostly he'd founded his various charities because even in his prime, he'd known that he couldn't be everywhere and give people the help they needed. Some small part of him still remembered what things had been like when he hadn't had a quirk. Melissa sipped her water bottle. Too right, Uncle Mite. She turned back to the beach, face set in a determined expression. I've got a lot of catching up to do. Toshinori smiled gently. He knew the feeling. Timeline, 4 months, 2 weeks to exam. Shinso hadn't had a lot of free time with his training regime. Most of his time was taken up with going to school, then meeting with Eraserhead and Miss Joke. Training with Eraserhead and Soga was usually physically intense, going on parkour runs and sparring until he could barely move. Miss Joke's idea of training was to do physical exercise while forcing him to recite terrible jokes. Today, though, he had a rest period. Eraserhead had drilled into him what would happen if he overtrained, including some extremely informative diagrams and symptoms of what would happen if he did. After that presentation, he'd been seriously freaked out. He couldn't deny that his hard work had been paying off. He couldn't pinpoint the exact time when he started to actually have something resembling muscle tone, but it was there. Overall, he felt stronger, faster, more resilient. It really felt like he could be a hero. But today was a rest day, and so he was going to spend it going to a bookstore. Shinsu had read a lot of books, mostly because it was a hobby that didn't risk somebody accusing you of trying to brainwash them. The store itself was pretty small, the smell of books, fresh and old, permeating the air. Shinso idly flicked through the various magazines. They had a couple of entertaining conspiracy magazines. Shinso didn't believe in any of that conspiracy shit, but it was good for a laugh. Somebody else came into the magazine aisle, looking at the same magazines. Shinso hadn't seen this person before. He was pretty sure he'd remember somebody whose hair was split red and white like that. Looked like a private school uniform as well. For a short time, Shinso flicked through magazines, though Shinso noticed that the other teenager was staring at him. He turned to the magazine fan. Yep, the other guy was definitely staring at him, gray and blue eyes focused on him, and that was one hell of a burn scar. Shinso's limited social repertoire didn't cover what to do with this, so he hedged his bets. The words from the other teenager were clipped and cold, almost resigned. Get it over with. Are you going to ask about my father? Shinso looked at him with a slightly funny look. He looked vaguely familiar, maybe? But Shinso didn't particularly care, especially about his father. Definitely some rich kid or something. Not really? The other teenager stared at him for a few seconds, then picked up a magazine stiffly and opened it. Shinso idly looked at the cover. Well, guess they're talking about reptilians in government again. Hey, you know what lizards are great with computers? Monitor lizards. The teenager blinked, turning the pages. His eyes traced the article, following through the evidence that the author had produced. He didn't say anything, but he seemed to be interested. as if he'd found something that he hadn't realized he'd needed until now. Shinso managed to get out a deadpan smile. Yeah, that's pretty good. They tell you the truth that's been suppressed by the government. Considering how many leaks get out of big government, I think they need to get a plumber or something in. Still no response, but Shinso knew he was getting somewhere. Shinso grinned. You know what's weird? Politicians and lawyers, they're both kinds of reptile. The other teen's mismatched eyes flicked up briefly. How so? They're both slimy and cold-blooded. The other teenager stared at him for several seconds with a neutral expression. That was pretty funny. Shinso returned the stare. That wasn't exactly my best joke, but sure. He picked up an older issue. If you like that one, then you should read this. They talk about how the moon landings were faked. The guy picked it up. I didn't know about that. Shinso grinned. Yeah, hey, why was the moon landing fake? The pages flipped to the main article. It says here because the shots from the moon show the Earth in the completely wrong way. The moon's still up there. It didn't go anywhere. The teenager stood there for a second. The corner of his mouth twitched. Side-splitting. Shinso grinned. Name's Shinso. What's yours? The other teenager stood there for a few seconds. Todoroki. And that was that. They spent the next few minutes talking about the various theories in the magazines, Shinso cracking jokes that failed to get more than a customary reaction. Eventually, the other teenager left, several pulpy magazines in hand. Shinso said goodbye to his new friend? Maybe, but he still hoped to meet the guy another time. Timeline, 4 months to Bakugo Katsuki pummeled the sandbag as if it had personally offended him. Sweat dripped off of him as he continued, the mat beneath him absorbing it and neutralizing the highly explosive compound. The UA exams were coming soon, just a couple of months away. The rest of the extras in his class were slacking off doing other dumb stuff, as if they thought they were going to get in without putting in the effort. His own friends, Fingers and Teeth, were doing some other shit. Not Bakugo. Only the best of the best made it into UA, and he was aiming to be the best of all time. Sure, his quirk was amazing, but they also required you to be near the top of your class in every subject. He'd aced the mock test, sure, but that was just the written test. There was still the practical. He finished his routine, taking a moment to recover. Then he carefully mopped up the rest of his sweat and put the rest of his equipment away. He frowned at the holder. Okay, which fucking moron didn't put the weights away properly? He yelled, grabbing the offending items. He slammed them back into their proper positions. Fucking assholes, not giving a damn about people in the gym. And people said he was an asshole. One shower later, he scrubbed the floor clean and was back in his regular clothes. He stomped out, heading back home to work on the next bullshit project. Bakugo walked down the street, grabbing a can and slamming it into the recycling bin. Ever since the sludge villain, he'd been pushing himself harder and harder. Getting rescued by Mastermind, some weird villain like that had immensely pissed him off and still did. How some moron who acted like that hadn't been caught by the heroes was pretty weird, but Bakugo had a plan of his own. When he became a hero, he was going to find Mastermind and beat the shit out of him. A feral grin crossed his face as he went home. A large man about a head taller than him took one look at him and crossed to the other side of the street. Bakugo didn't pay too much attention to that extra. If there was one good thing that had come out of that goddamn moron, it had been seeing how the heroes had reacted and seeing what he'd have to beat. Bunch of losers standing around with their thumbs up their asses, not pushing themselves at the crucial moment. He was going to shove his victories in their faces. Mwah! Bakugo whipped around. The fucking dipshit was running with those goddamn robot spiders of his, a cartoonishly large sack over his shoulder. The other villains with him, Bakugo didn't know or care about their names, so he nicknamed them Rabbit, Shitty Hat, and Piss Stain, were keeping pace. For a moment, Bakugo blinked, then he tore after them with a bloodthirsty grin on his face. This was going to be his third direct villain encounter. He was still a little pissed off at that sand villain, who he hadn't been able to properly beat up. He knew he could have taken that guy out. Sure, the heroes had said that he shouldn't try that again, but he knew that if he could take out some shitty villains without their help, It would be a jump start to his hero career. It didn't look like they'd noticed him. He rounded the corner, the shithead on his fucking robot spider laughing. They'd gone to what looked like a park of some sort, obviously trying to escape. Mastermind posed to the few onlookers watching the scene. A few of them started to take pictures. Who would challenge the brilliant Mastermind now? Krakathoom! Bakugo couldn't wait. Hey, dickhead! Mastermind whirled around, the other extras turning as Bakugo stomped closer. The fucking prick seemed off balance, which was good. Meant Bakugo could kill him that much more efficiently. Ah, you're the guy I rescued. What was your name? Because I don't know. Bakugo's hands popped with explosions. Bunny stepped forwards, but Mastermind shook his head. Doesn't fucking matter. You ain't running away from me. Mastermind seemed pleased, pointing at Bakugo. Really? Are we arch enemies or something? Bakugo shook with restrained rage. Sure, whatever. Arch goddamn enemies. He raised a hand, preparing for a larger and more threatening explosion. Not gonna matter since I'm gonna fucking kill you. Halt, villain. Bakugo's explosions temporarily went down as he saw a couple of heroes round the corner. Kamui Woods was the one who had shouted, wood curling to try and capture the villains. Stealing jewels in broad daylight? You're truly the scum of the earth. Mastermind laughed. Aw, Kamui Woods, I'm touched. Mount Lady scowled, the heroes and villains getting ready to fight. She shot a glance to Bakugo, eyes widening a bit. Kid, you should get out of the way. Bakugo weighed the situation up. If it had been just the shitty villains, he would have definitely crushed Mastermind and the extras. However, the heroes were there. Getting into a fight with the villains with heroes there would likely leave his record damaged. Bakugo wanted to crush villains, not get a record for something as fucking stupid as fighting without self-defense as a justification. Ultimately, he shoved his hands in his pockets. Sure, fine. He glared at Mastermind. I'm still gonna pull you inside out and make you swallow yourself. Mastermind gave him a thumbs-up sign. Sure thing, Kea, killer hands, or whatever your name is, since I don't know what it is. What a weirdo. Mastermind turned to the heroes. Fools, you cannot compare to the brilliant machinations of Mastermind. Mount Lady sighed, getting into a fighting position. Don't be so sure, villain. Justice will prevail today. Mastermind giggled. You think so? Look where I'm standing. Bakugo had backed up a fair distance, watching the scene unfurl before him. Mostly because he wanted to see how Mastermind fought. He scanned the area, trying to see what Mastermind was. Keep off the grass. That was what the sign near the park said. Bakugo blinked, then stared at the villains, who were plainly stepping on the grass. The heroes' eyes traveled from the sign to their location as well. Shitty Hat facepalmed while Pistain laughed. Kamui Woods was the first to speak, trying to get back some of his prior attitude. Stepping on the grass when there's a sign telling you not to? That's pure evil. Mount Lady stared at Kamui Woods as if he'd grown a second head. He looked back, clearly trying to excuse his shitty behavior. Mastermind posed triumphantly. Indeed, he threw his head back. Wah! Bakugo looked around as the heroes and villains paused. Bunny spoke to Mastermind while the other extras stared. Mastermind? Did your voice change? Mastermind shook his head. No, I didn't. He glared at a side street, dramatically pointing. It came from over there? How could you? I am the one who laughs. The figure strode out from the side street, a dramatic light shining on them. Foolish villain. You stand before... Oh, die. The freak had a black leather coat with a huge collar. The guy was skinny as hell with a shock of purple hair and red eyes and wore belts on his arms, 2 goddamn chokers, along with a goddamn eye patch. He even had heeled boots on. Bakugo felt the overwhelming urge to steal this guy's lunch money and call him a nerd. What was his name again? Whatever, he'd just think of him as Beltfucker. Mastermind and the other heroes stared at the newcomer. Who? Mastermind asked. Beltfucker slumped. See, come on, I'm Odd Eye, the edgelord hero. Bakugo stared at him as a bunch of other weirdos in black robes and white cloth masks, each decorated with a single eye, came around him. The other heroes were similarly confused, trading glances with each other. Mount Lady was the first to speak. So, you're actually a hero? He stared at her. Of course. For though I have a dark power that requires me to keep my right eye covered, he doesn't. He just thinks it looks cool. The dork ignored the extra, gesturing dramatically. In my chest beats the heart of a troubled hero. Mastermind shared a glance with the other heroes. They shook their heads. That's, good for you. So are you. Beltfucker turned to his extras. Come, my familiars. Let's help our noble friends capture this wastrel. We're your sidekicks, Odd Eye, the man sighed, the other extras getting ready. Mount Lady looked at one of the others as she expanded to her full height. Why are you working with this guy again? The sidekick spared a glance. He pays well, and we get holidays and overtime. Mount Lady blinked, temporarily distracted. Wait, you get overtime? I don't get overtime. Then a robot spider tried to attack her ankle. With a growl of frustration, she stomped on it like a bug. The extras charged, Mastermind's robot spider things, fighting off the weirdly robed extras. Mastermind started laughing, idly bringing up his freeze ray to stop Kamui Wood's attack solid. Mwah! Your stupid and useless attempts to capture the League of Supervillains are as stupid as they are useless. Thunder boomed, the other heroes trying to get closer, as Pistain fired a beam, and Shitty Hat threw some nets from his fucking smoke. The rest of the extras on the sidewalk had already dispersed, but not Bakugo. Seeing the pros up close was not completely shit. He watched as Beltfucker did some sort of tricky maneuver to get closer to Mastermind, managing to dart across the space in the blink of an eye. Beltfucker had a decent turn of speed at least. He clasped a hand onto the villain's head. Now, reveal your darkest secrets. Mastermind seemed to struggle, then started talking. All Might's the coolest. The fighting briefly stopped as Mastermind started babbling. When I become a big enough villain, I want to be All Might's arch nemesis. Then I'll be K. The villain suddenly jerked his head away from Beltfucker's grasping hand, seeming to curl up on himself. How? Beltfucker laughed madly. Impressed? That was my quirk, Mind Reaper. With a touch of my hand, I can force you to reveal your deepest, most embarrassing secrets. What's more, if I keep my hand there long enough, I'll start to learn about you more and more, including whatever secrets you're hiding under the mask. Mastermind recoiled. Oh, really? Because I don't have any secrets under here. Not at all. He turned to the other villains. Okay, I think we, need to make our escape. Like right now. Beltfucker grinned madly. Ah, but you think you can overcome a hero like me? Think again. Mastermind started to run, the other villains taking the obvious route as well. The other heroes saw this and decided to try and corner the group. Pistain tried to hold off Beltfucker, but then he got touched on the head. I like hero idol singer Popstep, and I sing her songs in the shower. Pistain collapsed, clutching his mouth with his hands. Shit, my street cred. Bunny glared at Beltfucker as she grabbed one of his extras, slamming the other man into Kamui Wood's latest attempt to bind the villains. So help me, I'll. Beltfucker managed to grab her, grinning. So, what's your secret, pretty lady? Bunny seemed to be struggling, trying to keep her mouth shut and glaring at the idiot. Beltfucker looked pleased. Oh, he looked at her with an amused leer, glancing between her and the other villains. So you have a crush on. A couple of things happened very quickly. First, Bunny grabbed Beltfucker by the mouth with a mortified expression on her face, a canister of ink pouring into her mouth. Then, somehow, she tossed him the length of the street, a peal of maniacal laughter coming from the hero, right at Bakugo. The other heroes tried to grab him, but the villains started to get away, forcing them to return attention. Bakugo had really wanted to go after the villains, but he wasn't going to see this fucking moron get hurt in front of him if he could help it. So with a sigh, he managed to grab the nerd, bracing himself as the hero crashed into him. Got you, you fucking. The hero's hand fell on his head. Bakugo had a brief moment to freak out before he found he was shouting. It always feels like Deku's better than me, even though it shouldn't be. So I've been mean to him, because if I'm not the best, I'm nothing. The heroes stared. The extras stared. The villains stared. Mastermind in particular seemed to be especially thrown before shaking himself. With a gesture, he started to pull the villains away, managing to get away as the heroes had to shake themselves a bit after that outburst. Bakugo stared straight ahead. He should be moving, but hearing himself say that was... Bakugo didn't exactly have the right words for that shit. He just focused on some point in the distance as his brain tried to pull itself back together. Beltfucker picked himself up. He looked at Bakugo with wide eyes. "Young man, I am so sorry about unleashing your inner darkness." Bakugo couldn't bring himself to beat Beltfucker up. While the heroes were trying to chase the villains, he went home. Probably was going to have to go back to the therapist again. Timeline: 3 months, 2 weeks to exams. Fuyumi quietly rang her mobile phone. A few dials later, it was picked up, a familiar voice ringing out. "Heya, Fuyumi. How are things with the old bastard?" Fuyumi sighed, glancing at her little brother's room. "Well, what happened with Shoto? Is he all right?" Fuyumi shook her head. "It's same old, sort of." But she took a breath. "I think Shoto's become a conspiracy theorist." There was a distinct pause. "What?" Fuyumi sighed. "Well, this was a couple of weeks ago. A couple of weeks ago. Family dinners were always quiet. If you could really call it a family dinner when there was only one parent and 2 children there, one because he had no choice, and the other because Shoto desperately needed somebody at least somewhat normal there." Fuyumi passed a dish over to Shoto, her brother accepting with a quiet nod. Endeavor, their father, ate quietly and efficiently. Fuyumi felt the vacuum opening up again. "So, how was your day, Shoto?" Shoto briefly looked up, then back to his bowl. Their father briefly paused eating, some expression flickering on his face before he gently took another portion. Fuyumi sighed. Tonight was not a night where anybody was talking, it seemed. She was about to let it go when Shoto spoke. "I went to a bookshop after school." Fuyumi's chopsticks stopped before they entered her mouth. Endeavor, father, blinked as well, a surprised look on his face before it went back to his customary scowl. "Why?" Surprisingly, the question didn't have any heat to it. Shoto stared at him. "It was a rest day. I thought I should do something with my time." Their father grunted, as if he hadn't known the intense schedule that Shoto lived under. Fuyumi managed to smile. "Well, that sounds good, Shoto," she said for lack of anything else. At least it felt a bit more normal. "Unnecessary, Shoto. You should be focused on your schoolwork and heroics theory. Anything else is pointless," Endeavor grunted. Fuyumi shot him a glare, which he let wash over him as he always did when she tried to get him to let Shoto have something resembling a childhood. Her brother shot Endeavor, father, a cool look, then simply nodded, returning to his food. Fuyumi and Endeavor, father, did the same. For a short time, there was silence. Then, "Did you know that the reptilians control the government?" Enji Todoroki choked on his grilled fish. Now, Natsuo had listened quietly, then broke into laughter. Please tell me there's a picture, Fuyumi," he gasped. Fuyumi frowned. "This is serious, Natsuo," she hissed. After she'd managed the Heimlich maneuver, Todoroki Sr. had stared at Shoto for a moment, then had asked with the boiling politeness of a banked volcano where on the internet he'd heard that. Shoto had coolly replied that he'd read it in a magazine, so it was more likely to be true, and then started citing evidence about the increasing number of politicians with reptilian quirks in power. Their father had stared at Shoto for several seconds before abruptly leaving to go on patrol. Fuyumi had managed a slightly shaky smile to Shoto as he left to do schoolwork. And now, he's saying that Mastermind is a reptilian agent of the government. Apparently, All Might has at least 3 secret love children, and the moon landing was faked. Fuyumi, I'm honestly worried he might have fallen in with somebody weird online who's exploiting him for father's reputation. You think the old bastard is going to try and, well, force him to stop this conspiracy stuff? Fuyumi glanced out in the hallway. He's trying to find those magazines, but Shoto must have hidden them pretty well. Usually if Shoto says any of that nonsense, he just sighs. Natsuo seemed to pause. All right, maybe I'll come back, only to see if Shoto's a loony. Fuyumi glared at her phone. Natsuo, got it, he's only a conspiracy nutter. Fuyumi sighed as Natsuo hung up. Brothers, infinitely frustrating sometimes. Timeline, 3 months 1 week to exams, late November. Chapter end notes. Author's notes. Well, this took me a surprising time. I redid quite a bit of it. Shinso making friends with Todoroki amused me greatly, so I put it in. We all know that Shoto being a conspiracy theorist is entertaining. Also, edited a couple of lines since Japan's health system makes more sense than an American one. Now it's about overtime. Also added in the proper for Pop Step. Next time, the league expands its roster. A fan favorite will definitely appear. Maybe some other revelations. Link in the description. Please like, share, and subscribe. Comment in the comment section if you want me